George S. Patton did not fight the war quietly, and he did not fight it alone. From the moment he entered the Second World War, Patton's greatest battles were not always against the enemy in front of him. They were fought across maps, conference tables, and command channels. Clashes of philosophy, temperament, and control within an alliance struggling to hold itself together under pressure. Patton believed war rewarded speed, instinct, and relentless momentum. The Allied command structure believed war required coordination, restraint, and balance. Those beliefs collided constantly. The Allied war effort was a coalition built on necessity rather than harmony. British and American commanders brought different experiences, different doctrines, and different tolerances for risk. Political considerations weighed as heavily as military ones. And unity mattered, sometimes more than victory at speed. Patton chafed against all of it. He saw hesitation as opportunity lost. He saw delay as surrender to friction. Where others weighed consequences, Patton pressed for movement. He argued openly. He ignored tone. He challenged decisions he believed would slow the war down, regardless of how those challenges were received. North Africa exposed the fault lines early. Patton's discipline and aggression restored confidence after early failures, but his methods unsettled allies who valued cooperation over command dominance. His insistence on sharpness and obedience clashed with leaders navigating fragile multinational relationships. Results followed, but so did tension. Sicily turned tension into controversy. Patton's rapid advances delivered success, but disrupted carefully planned coordination. His actions embarrassed allies, strained command trust, and raised questions about whether battlefield momentum justified political fallout. The campaign ended with Patton sidelined, not because he failed militarily, but because his behavior threatened the cohesion of the alliance itself. For Patton, the punishment was intolerable. He believed he was being restrained by caution rather than judgment. Others believed they were containing a commander who could win battles and lose wars. The disagreement was not about competence. It was about control. Even when Patton returned to command, conflict followed. In France, his Third Army's explosive advance thrilled some and alarmed others. Logistics were strained, priorities clashed. As Patton demanded fuel and freedom of movement, higher command demanded balance across the front. Each pause frustrated him. Each restriction reinforced his belief that bureaucracy was the enemy of victory. The Ardennes brought temporary alignment. Crisis silenced argument. Speed was suddenly essential. Patton's instincts matched necessity, and his ability to act decisively under pressure restored confidence at the highest levels. But even then, the truce was conditional. Success did not erase concern. It postponed it. Patton was never fully trusted, and never fully restrained. He was used where momentum mattered most, and checked where political or strategic risk outweighed immediate gain. His career became a constant negotiation between brilliance and liability, between what he could achieve and what the alliance could tolerate. The history of Patton's conflicts with Allied command is not a story of insubordination alone. It is a story of coalition warfare, of competing priorities under existential threat, of how victory requires both speed and restraint, and how rarely they coexist peacefully. Patton forced the Allies to confront an uncomfortable truth, that winning wars demands personalities capable of friction, and systems capable of surviving them. He was not wrong often, but he was rarely easy. Before going further, pause and notice the atmosphere around you. Is there noise nearby, or quiet? Are you settling into the day, or letting it wind down? And what time has found you right now? Patton never believed in silence, but understanding him sometimes requires it. Then this is the story of Patton's conflicts with Allied command, the battles behind the battles, where strategy, ego, politics, and urgency collided while the war still raged. Fort Myer, Virginia, August 1928. A cavalry officer stands at the edge of an Olympic pentathlon course, his boots polished to mirror shine, his jaw set with the kind of determination that disturbs comfortable men. George Smith Patton, Jr. is 32 years old, wealthy beyond the needs of any soldier, descended from Virginia military aristocracy that stretches back before the Revolution. He does not need to be here. He does not need to prove anything. But he is here anyway, competing against younger men in a grueling 5-event competition that will leave him bruised, exhausted, and carrying a bronze medal that means more to him than most of his military decorations. The other officers watch him with a mixture of admiration and unease. There is something excessive about Patton, something that refuses containment. He studies warfare the way religious scholars study scripture, filling journals with tactical analyses of Napoleon's campaigns and Alexander's movements across Persia. When he speaks about combat, his eyes focus on some distant battlefield that exists only in his imagination. His fellow officers dismiss this intensity as eccentricity, the quirk of a rich man playing soldier. They are wrong. What they are witnessing is not eccentricity, but inevitability. Patton is not preparing for a career. He is preparing for collision. The seeds of that collision were planted years earlier, in the mud and chaos of the First World War. Camp Meade, Maryland, 1919. 2 young officers sit in a cramped office, surrounded by technical manuals and mechanical diagrams, arguing about the future of warfare. One of them is Patton. The other is Dwight David Eisenhower, a capable administrator with a methodical mind and a talent for compromise. They are collaborating on tank doctrine, trying to convince the War Department that armored vehicles represent the future of ground combat. But even in this collaboration, a fundamental divide is emerging. Eisenhower sees tanks as supporting weapons, mobile artillery that should advance in coordination with infantry and under the careful control of corps commanders. Patton sees something else entirely. He sees tanks as breakthrough weapons, and instruments of shock and pursuit that should smash through defensive lines and race into the enemy's rear areas before he can recover. Eisenhower wants coordination. Patton wants chaos. Eisenhower wants safety. Patton wants speed. They publish their theories together in the Infantry Journal, but the War Department reads their proposals and files them away, as interesting but impractical. The generals who won the last war do not want to hear about the next one. Patton's response is to write more, to study more, to prepare more. He fills notebooks with tactical exercises, sketching out hypothetical battles where armored columns cut through static defenses like heated blades through wax. His fellow officers think he is obsessed. They are right, but obsession in the right moment becomes genius. Hawaii, 1937. Patton is now a lieutenant colonel, commanding cavalry units in the Pacific, far from the war clouds gathering over Europe. He should be following standard training protocols, conducting routine exercises, maintaining the comfortable peacetime rhythms of garrison life. Instead, he is conducting unauthorized tactical experiments that are making his superiors deeply uncomfortable. He takes his cavalry units on extended maneuvers without proper clearance, pushing his men through exhausting night movements and surprise attack drills that bear no resemblance to approved doctrine. When questioned, he argues that future warfare will reward initiative over coordination, that commanders who wait for permission will arrive too late to matter. His commanding officers note his exceptional tactical results, but also note his disturbing independence. One evaluation report praises his aggressive spirit and tactical innovation, while cautioning that his tendency toward independent action makes him difficult to control. This is the pattern that will define Patton's entire career. He will always be brilliant, he will always be effective, and he will always be a problem. The Army promotes him because his results are undeniable, but they promote him uneasily, aware that they are harnessing something they cannot fully direct. The ideological foundation of Patton's approach crystallizes in his lectures at Fort Benning Infantry School, 1940. Europe is already at war. France has fallen. Britain stands alone. America is preparing for inevitable involvement, and the Army is desperately trying to train officers for modern mechanized combat. Patton is invited to lecture on armored tactics, and his presentations become legendary for their intensity and their radicalism. He does not teach caution. He does not teach consolidation. He teaches what he calls calculated risk, the idea that aggressive action, even with incomplete information, is safer than defensive waiting. He tells his students that speed itself is a form of armor, that rapid movement disrupts enemy planning faster than the enemy can adapt. He argues that breakthrough operations should prioritize pursuit over consolidation. that a retreating enemy is more vulnerable than a prepared defensive position. His lectures circulate through the officer corps, photocopied and passed hand to hand, becoming underground doctrine for young officers who sense that the coming war will reward aggression. But senior commanders read these same lectures with growing alarm. Patton is teaching methods that bypass coordinated command structure, that prioritize local initiative over centralized control. He is, they realize, teaching insubordination, not the crude insubordination of refusing orders, but the sophisticated insubordination of making orders irrelevant through tactical fait accompli. The full scope of Patton's preparation becomes visible only when examining his private records from this period. He does not simply study military history as casual interest or professional development. He approaches it as a sacred discipline, filling dozens of leather-bound journals with tactical analyses that dissect ancient and modern battles with equal intensity. His study of Napoleon is particularly revealing. Most officers admire Napoleon's victories. Patton studies Napoleon's tempo, the speed at which the French emperor could concentrate forces, strike, and withdraw before enemy commanders understood what was happening. He fills pages with mathematical calculations, working out the logistics of rapid movement, determining how fast an army can advance before outrunning its supply lines, how to balance speed against security. His journals reveal a mind that thinks about warfare in ways the American army does not yet understand. He is preparing for a kind of war that has not been officially recognized, developing doctrine for operations that have not been approved. When war finally comes, Patton will not need to learn. He will already know. The technical foundation of his theories dates back even further to 1920. Though when Patton published a series of articles in Infantry Journal that were dismissed as too radical for serious consideration, he commanded the 304th Tank Brigade in World War I with 147 tanks, an unprecedented concentration of armor that gave him practical experience most American officers lacked. His articles argued that tanks should operate in massed formations, punching through defensive lines rather than supporting infantry advances. The War Department read his proposals and rejected them as dangerous fantasy. Tanks, the generals insisted, were too vulnerable and too unreliable for independent operations. They would remain supporting weapons controlled by infantry commanders, limited to walking pace. Patton's response was not to modify his theories, but to refine them. He studied mechanical reliability, logistics, communications, all the practical obstacles his critics cited. He developed solutions to each problem, filling his journals with technical specifications and operational procedures. By the time the War Department finally accepts armored doctrine in 1940, Patton has already spent 20 years developing it. He is not learning the new doctrine. He invented it. His family background shaped this confidence and independence in ways that disturbed the officer corps' democratic pretensions. Patton came from Virginia military aristocracy and California wealth, a combination that gave him financial independence most officers could never imagine. He did not need the Army's salary. He did not need its approval for his social status. This freedom was dangerous. It meant Patton could afford to take career risks that would destroy other officers, could afford to challenge superiors who held life or death power over normal careers. His wealth allowed him to study warfare as a gentleman scholar rather than a professional soldier, to travel Europe examining battlefields, to purchase private libraries of military history, to conduct tactical experiments at his own expense. When senior officers criticized his methods, he could ignore them without fear of poverty. This financial independence translated into operational independence, a willingness to act without permission because he did not need institutional blessing to validate his existence. The Army had selected thousands of talented officers, but only one could afford to be ungovernable. The 1928 Olympics entry reveals something essential about Patton's psychology. He competed in the modern pentathlon, a 5-event competition designed to test military skills: shooting, fencing, swimming, riding, and cross-country running. He finished 5th overall, but earned bronze in the individual competition, a remarkable achievement for a 32-year-old competing against younger athletes. But the revealing detail is not his success, but his participation. Patton entered as a gentleman competitor, paying his own way, taking leave from military duties to train. He did not need another medal or another achievement. He competed because he needed to prove himself in civilian arenas, to demonstrate that his excellence transcended military hierarchy. This compulsion to prove himself, to win recognition outside institutional channels, would define his entire career. He would always be fighting two wars: the official war against designated enemies and the private war against anyone who doubted his genius. The first war he could win through tactics. The second war he could never win at all. By 1941, when America enters World War II, Patton's reputation precedes him like an omen. Junior officers admire his tactical brilliance and hope to serve under him. Senior commanders respect his results and fear his independence. The War Department knows it needs aggressive leaders for mechanized warfare, but worries that Patton's aggression cannot be controlled. This tension creates an impossible situation. Patton is too talented to ignore, but too difficult to manage. Promoting him risks unleashing chaos. Not promoting him risks losing battles. The Army's solution is characteristically bureaucratic. Give him command, but surround him with careful supervisors. Let him fight, but never let him act independently. This compromise satisfies no one. Patton knows he is being watched and resents the supervision. His superiors know they are trying to control a hurricane and resent the effort required. The stage is set for inevitable collision. The only question is how explosive that collision will be. The fundamental truth about Patton, visible to anyone willing to examine his pre-war record, is that his entire career was a prelude to conflict. His aggressive philosophy made conflict inevitable. His contempt for caution made peace impossible. His studied mastery of warfare made him indispensable. His personal intensity made him intolerable. These contradictions could coexist in peacetime, when results did not matter, and institutional politics controlled advancement. But war would force resolution. War would demand effectiveness over compatibility, results over relationships. War would give Patton everything he wanted: operational command, tactical freedom, the chance to prove his theories in blood and fire. And war would give his superiors everything they feared: an uncontrollable genius who would win battles while threatening the entire command structure. The man who refused to wait for permission was about to be given an army. The institution that valued coordination above all else was about to unleash chaos. Neither side understood what was coming. Both sides would discover that victory has costs beyond casualties. Casablanca, French Morocco, January 1943. The Anfa Hotel, requisitioned as conference headquarters, buzzes with tension as President Franklin Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill discuss the future of the war. Their armies have secured North Africa's western approaches, but the eastern campaign has stalled in blood and confusion. The German Africa Corps, commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, has just delivered a humiliating defeat to American forces at Kasserine Pass. The U.S. Second Corps has been mauled, suffering 3,700 casualties and losing more than 3,000 men captured, equipment abandoned, positions overrun. American troops fought bravely, but leadership failed catastrophically. Now, Roosevelt and Churchill must decide who can salvage this disaster before it destroys Allied credibility. They choose George Patton, and Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower receives the news with visible reluctance. He knows Patton is effective. He also knows Patton is uncontrollable. What he does not yet understand is that effectiveness and control are about to become incompatible requirements. The appointment is not a reward. It is a calculated risk that will define the entire Allied command relationship. Eisenhower's reluctance is not personal weakness, but institutional wisdom. He has built Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force on principles of coordination and cooperation, a command structure designed to balance American, British, and French interests while maintaining unified strategic direction. This structure requires commanders who follow doctrine, respect boundaries, communicate constantly, and subordinate local initiative to theater-wide planning. Patton represents the opposite philosophy. He believes in breakthrough rather than coordination, in speed rather than consolidation, in tactical opportunity rather than strategic planning. Eisenhower knows that giving Patton command will introduce a destabilizing element into carefully constructed Allied unity. But Kasserine has made caution impossible. American forces need victory immediately, before political pressure forces command changes that could destroy the entire North African strategy. Eisenhower makes his choice, but he makes it with profound misgivings. He assigns Patton to Second Corps with explicit instructions to restore fighting spirit and discipline. What he does not explicitly say, but what both men understand, is that Patton must win quickly without disrupting Allied coordination. These requirements are contradictory. The contradiction will become crisis. Gafsa, Tunisia, March 19, 43. Patton has commanded Second Corps for exactly 6 weeks. 6 weeks of brutal reorganization that has transformed a defeated formation into an aggressive strike force. He has relieved incompetent officers, imposed strict discipline, demanded constant training, and personally visited frontline units to assess morale and capability. Now he is ready to attack. His objective is Gafsa, a town in central Tunisia that controls approaches to critical German supply lines. Eisenhower's doctrine requires careful preparation, coordinated advance with British forces to the north, consolidated positions before any major offensive movement. As Patton ignores all of it, he orders what his staff calls a hell or high water attack, a straight thrust at Gafsa with maximum speed and minimal coordination. His units jump off at dawn, advance through the day, overwhelm surprise German defenders, and occupy Gafsa by nightfall. Within 72 hours, Patton's forces have recaptured 200 square miles of territory, taken prisoners, captured equipment, and fundamentally disrupted German defensive planning. The tactical success is undeniable. The operational insubordination is equally undeniable. Eisenhower has ordered slower consolidation. Patton has delivered rapid breakthrough. The question now is whether Eisenhower will punish success or accept that his doctrine has been proven inadequate. The confrontation comes in early April, when Eisenhower makes an unannounced visit to Second Corps headquarters. He arrives expecting to find Patton following the coordinated advance doctrine outlined in theater orders. Instead, he finds that Patton has completely reorganized Second Corps' command structure without authorization, reassigned units without approval, changed operational procedures without consultation, and fundamentally altered the way American forces operate in Tunisia. Eisenhower's staff officers are horrified. This is not how military organizations function. You cannot simply restructure corps-level command because you disagree with existing arrangements. Patton's defense is characteristically blunt. The existing structure was producing defeats. His structure is producing victories. Therefore, his structure is correct. And he delivers this assessment with unbending confidence, standing in front of operational maps that show his forces advancing where other units are stalled. Eisenhower is caught in an impossible position. He must assert command authority, but he cannot punish obvious success. He cannot endorse Patton's methods, but he cannot deny their effectiveness. The meeting ends without resolution, which means Patton interprets it as permission to continue. Eisenhower returns to headquarters, understanding that he has lost control of his most aggressive commander. The final confrontation comes at Sfax Airport, April 20th, 1943, in an incident that perfectly captures Patton's contempt for ordinary constraints. His forces have captured a German airfield near the Tunisian coast. Before engineers can secure the position, Patton arrives in his command car, observes Italian aircraft approaching at low altitude, seizes a captured German anti-aircraft gun, and personally shoots down one of the aircraft. His staff watches in astonishment as their commanding general operates enemy weapons in active combat. When questioned later, Patton claims command prerogative. He was the senior officer present. The enemy was threatening captured positions. He took appropriate action. The explanation is technically correct and completely absurd. Corps commanders do not operate anti-aircraft guns. They do not expose themselves to direct enemy fire. They do not take personal combat action that could result in their death or capture. Eisenhower is furious when he receives the report, but he cannot remove Patton because political pressure from Washington has made him untouchable. And Secretary of War Henry Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall have both expressed support for Patton's aggressive leadership. Eisenhower is trapped commanding a subordinate he cannot control and cannot remove. The pattern is established. Patton will deliver victories. Eisenhower will deliver reprimands. Neither will change. The deeper conflict is doctrinal, not personal. Eisenhower's official doctrine, developed at Supreme Headquarters and endorsed by the combined Chiefs of Staff, requires coordinated advance across the entire North African theater. This means American forces in Tunisia must synchronize their movements with British Eighth Army advancing from Libya, must consolidate each position before advancing to the next, must maintain supply lines and communications at all times. The doctrine prioritizes strategic unity over local opportunity, theater-wide planning over tactical improvisation. Patton's philosophy is precisely opposite. He believes breakthrough operations should prioritize speed over consolidation, that rapid advance disrupts enemy planning faster than the enemy can respond, that tactical opportunity should override strategic coordination. His March 20th radio transmission captures his thinking perfectly. I'm going to move so fast that they won't know where I am. When they find out where I am, I will be somewhere else. This is not coordination. This is chaos, but it is effective chaos. Chaos that produces territorial gains and German confusion. The geographic constraint makes the doctrinal conflict stark. Tunisia is only 140 miles wide at its narrowest point. In this compressed space, Patton's strategy of maximum speed over consolidation creates constant friction with British forces attempting to execute methodical advance. Coordination is impossible when one force is racing ahead while another consolidates carefully. Eisenhower's private correspondence from this period reveals his profound discomfort with Patton's success. In an April 1943 letter to General George Marshall, Eisenhower expresses concern about Patton's showboating. While admitting that tactical results are undeniable, the phrasing is revealing. Eisenhower does not dispute effectiveness. He disputes style. He objects not to what Patton achieves, but to how Patton achieves it, to the theatrical aggression and public visibility that make coordination difficult and Allied unity fragile. But Eisenhower cannot explain this concern to Marshall without appearing jealous of a subordinate's success. He cannot remove Patton without explaining why victory is somehow unacceptable. He is trapped by military logic that values results above all else, even when those results are produced through methods that threaten command cohesion. His letter to Marshall is careful, diplomatic, concerned. It changes nothing. Patton continues his aggressive operations. Eisenhower continues his diplomatic management. The gap between them widens. The tactical statistics from Second Corps operations under Patton reveal the scale of transformation. Before Patton's arrival, Second Corps had suffered catastrophic defeats at Kasserine Pass, losing ground and confidence. Under Patton's command from March through May 1943, DARP's Second Corps advanced steadily despite facing veteran German units, achieved territorial objectives ahead of schedule, and maintained casualty rates comparable to or better than other Allied formations. The unit that had been considered dangerously unreliable became one of the most effective American formations in theater. But this success came with costs Eisenhower found intolerable. Patton's rapid advances created supply difficulties, strained logistics networks, forced constant readjustment of theater plans. His aggressive tempo meant Second Corps was constantly out of position relative to planned Allied movements, requiring British forces to adjust their operations to account for American positions. This worked tactically, but failed strategically. It produced local victories while undermining theater-wide coordination. Eisenhower had to choose between the system and the results. He chose the system. Patton ignored the choice. The broader pattern emerging from North Africa would define Allied command relationships for the entire European war. Patton would identify tactical opportunities, exploit them aggressively, deliver dramatic victories, and create political crises. Eisenhower would manage those crises diplomatically, preserve Allied unity, maintain strategic coordination, and privately wish Patton was someone else's problem. Neither man was wrong. Patton was correct that aggressive tactics shorten campaigns and reduce casualties. Eisenhower was correct that uncoordinated operations risked strategic failure. Both philosophies had merit, but they could not coexist peacefully in the same command structure. When the North African campaign proved that American forces could produce aggressive commanders and careful administrators, but it did not prove they could make these officers cooperate productively. That question remained unanswered as Allied forces prepared for Sicily. The partnership between Eisenhower and Patton had survived its first test. Whether it could survive the next remained uncertain. The ultimate irony of the North African campaign is that both men achieved exactly what they wanted, while creating exactly what they feared. Patton proved his theories of aggressive warfare, demonstrated that speed and audacity could overcome defensive advantages, established his reputation as America's most effective tactical commander, but he also established his reputation as uncontrollable, difficult, politically dangerous. Eisenhower maintained Allied unity, preserved strategic coordination, managed the political complexities of coalition warfare, but he also learned that his most effective commander was also his most dangerous subordinate, that producing victories required tolerating insubordination. The North African campaign ended with Tunisia captured, Axis forces expelled, Mediterranean secured. It ended in victory, but it ended with unresolved tensions that would explode in Sicily, crystallize in France, and define the Allied command structure until the war's end. First blood had been drawn. Neither man understood how deep the wound would become. Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, 1932. The Army War College occupies a series of dignified brick buildings overlooking the Missouri River, in a place where promising officers gather to study operational art and strategic planning. Among the students this year are several who will become household names in the coming war: George Patton, Omar Bradley, Courtney Hodges, Walter Bedell Smith. They sit in identical classrooms, study identical texts, complete identical assignments. But when they write their culminating essays on modern warfare, the documents reveal fundamental disagreements that predict future conflicts. Patton's essay argues for breakthrough operations, rapid mechanized advances that disrupt enemy planning faster than defensive positions can be established. Bradley's essay emphasizes consolidated advances, methodical attacks that maintain supply lines and communications. Hodges advocates for infantry-centered operations with armored support. These are not minor tactical differences. These are incompatible visions of how modern war should be conducted. The instructors file these essays carefully, noting each officer's philosophical orientation. They do not yet understand that they are documenting a fault line that will fracture Allied command structure when tested by actual combat. The disagreements seem academic. They are actually existential. The philosophical divide becomes visible 10 years later at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, May 1943. Eisenhower has assembled his senior commanders to outline the doctrine that will govern Allied operations in Sicily and beyond. He presents what he calls measured advance, a systematic approach that requires thorough preparation before major offensives, consolidated positions after territorial gains, in coordinated movements across the entire theater. His presentation is clear, logical, comprehensive. It emphasizes the importance of unified command, the dangers of overextension, the necessity of maintaining supply lines in modern, mechanized warfare. Most officers nod in agreement. The doctrine sounds reasonable, professional, responsible. But photographs from the meeting capture Patton's face, showing visible skepticism. He does not interrupt. He does not challenge. But his expression makes clear that he disagrees fundamentally with everything being proposed. After the meeting, and Patton writes in his personal diary that Eisenhower's doctrine will produce slow victories at high cost, and that the enemy will always have time to prepare defenses if we advance at the speed of logistics. This criticism is devastating because it is partially correct. Eisenhower's measured advance prioritizes safety over speed, coordination over opportunity. It is the doctrine of an administrator, not a warrior. General Omar Bradley, serving as Patton's subordinate in North Africa, but soon to become his superior in France, writes a private memo in June 1943 that perfectly captures establishment concern about Patton's methods. Bradley acknowledges that Patton's tactics win battles, but argues they also risk the entire campaign if supply lines break or if enemy counterattacks catch American forces overextended. Aaron Bradley's analysis is not wrong. Aggressive breakthrough operations do create vulnerabilities. Rapid advances do strain logistics. Speed does increase risk. But Bradley's memo reveals his fundamental assumption. That risk is inherently bad, that the purpose of military operations is to minimize danger rather than maximize opportunity. This assumption pervades American military culture in 1943. The Army is institutionally conservative, trained to value preparation over improvisation, systematic planning over tactical opportunism. Patton represents heresy against these values. His philosophy assumes risk is acceptable if it produces decisive results, that overextension is preferable to methodical advance if it disrupts enemy planning. Bradley's memo circulates among senior commanders, reinforcing their conviction that Patton needs careful supervision. They read his objections as wisdom. Patton reads them as cowardice. Patton's own writings from this period reveal his contempt for cautious doctrine. His personal memoir entries, later published posthumously, include the stark declaration, "The most dangerous thing in warfare is to move slowly. Speed is safety." This statement inverts conventional military wisdom. Conventional doctrine teaches that careful preparation ensures safety, that methodical advance reduces casualties, that speed creates vulnerability. Patton argues precisely the opposite. He insists that rapid movement disrupts enemy planning so completely that defensive positions cannot be established, that aggressive pursuit prevents enemy recovery and reorganization, and that the side moving faster suffers fewer casualties because the enemy cannot coordinate effective resistance. His theory is not reckless improvisation, but calculated inversion of traditional thinking. He has studied enough military history to document how defensive warfare favors the prepared defender, but breakthrough warfare favors the aggressive attacker. He has analyzed enough battles to understand that casualties increase when attacking fortified positions, but decrease when pursuing disorganized retreats. His philosophy is heretical, but not irrational. The question is whether it is correct. The statistical evidence from North Africa provides initial answers, but raises deeper questions. Patton's Second Corps, operating under his aggressive philosophy from March through May 1943, achieved territorial gains with approximately 9.2% casualty rate among engaged forces. Other American and British Corps, operating under more cautious doctrine, averaged approximately 14.1% casualty rates while pursuing less aggressive objectives. These numbers appear to vindicate Patton's approach. His forces advanced faster and suffered proportionally fewer casualties. But the comparison is complicated by multiple variables. Patton often attacked objectives that were less heavily defended because his speed caught enemy forces unprepared. Other commanders attacked objectives that were more strategically important and therefore more heavily fortified. Patton's forces benefited from surprise and momentum. Other forces fought for positions that determined campaign outcomes. The casualty statistics prove something, but exactly what they prove remains contested. Patton's supporters argue the numbers demonstrate that aggressive tactics save lives by shortening campaigns. His critics argue the numbers reflect luck and favorable circumstances rather than superior doctrine. The doctrinal comparison becomes starker when examining operational tempo. Patton's forces in North Africa averaged 8.7 miles of advance per day during active operations. The theater average for American and British forces was 2.1 miles per day. This 4-to-1 difference in speed is extraordinary. It represents fundamentally different approaches to warfare. The methodical advance doctrine requires securing each position before advancing to the next, establishing supply lines, coordinating with adjacent units, preparing artillery support. This process is slow by design. It prioritizes certainty over speed, control over chaos. Patton's aggressive doctrine accepts uncertainty in exchange for tempo. His forces advance before supply lines are fully established, bypass strong points instead of reducing them, coordinate through radio communication rather than formal planning sessions. The specific military doctrine underlying cautious approach required 3-to-1 numerical superiority before initiating major offensive movements. Commanders would not attack unless they had overwhelming force advantage, reducing risk to acceptable levels. Patton operated on approximately 1.5 to 1 ratios, using speed as a force multiplier instead of waiting for numerical superiority. This created constant friction with logistics officers who calculated requirements based on conventional doctrine. The logistics argument against Patton's methods gained strength from hard mathematical analysis. Montgomery's supply officers calculated that Patton's operational tempo created consumption rates at 127% of planned capacity. This meant Patton's forces were literally operating beyond calculated logistical sustainability. They were consuming fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies faster than supply chains could deliver replacements. And conventional doctrine considered this operational failure. Patton considered it acceptable cost of decisive victory. His theory, developed from his 1920 writings, held that the more you sweat in peacetime, the less you bleed in war. He had spent 20 years developing aggressive tactics and training methods specifically to create forces capable of operating beyond normal logistical constraints. His commanders knew how to ration supplies, prioritize essential equipment, maintain operational tempo, even when ammunition was limited. This capability was not accident, but intentional preparation. Patton had designed his entire approach around the assumption that war rewards aggressive action despite logistical constraints. His critics argued he was gambling with American lives. He argued he was saving them by ending campaigns faster. The philosophical divide is ultimately irreconcilable because it reflects different theories about what warfare actually is. The cautious school, represented by Eisenhower and Montgomery and Bradley, all views warfare as organized violence that should be conducted systematically to achieve political objectives while minimizing casualties. This view prioritizes coordination, preparation, and overwhelming force. It assumes the purpose of military operations is to defeat enemy forces with maximum certainty and minimum loss. The aggressive school, represented by Patton, views warfare as competitive chaos, where psychological advantage matters more than material superiority. This view prioritizes speed, surprise, and moral ascendancy. It assumes the purpose of military operations is to break enemy will through relentless pressure that prevents recovery. Both philosophies can cite historical examples supporting their approach. Both can demonstrate tactical successes, but they cannot coexist in the same operational theater without creating constant friction. Coalition warfare requires unified doctrine. The Allied command structure is attempting to prosecute a war while harboring fundamentally incompatible theories about how wars should be fought. The question of which philosophy was actually correct for modern mechanized warfare would be tested repeatedly throughout the European campaign. Patton's aggressive approach would produce stunning breakthroughs in Sicily, spectacular advances in France, and controversial decisions that cost lives and saved lives in unpredictable combinations. The cautious approach would produce steady territorial gains, maintain supply lines, coordinated operations that achieve strategic objectives through systematic planning. Neither approach would fail completely. Neither would succeed completely. Instead, the war would demonstrate that both approaches had merit in different circumstances, that aggressive warfare worked brilliantly when exploiting surprise, but failed catastrophically when supply lines collapsed. That methodical warfare achieved certain victories, but sometimes arrived too late to prevent enemy recovery. The tragedy of the Allied command structure was not that it embraced the wrong philosophy, but that it could never resolve which philosophy should guide operations. Commanders would argue about doctrine, while soldiers fought battles, and the arguments would continue even after the battles were won. The ultimate question raised by this philosophical clash is whether military organizations can accommodate fundamentally different approaches to warfare simultaneously. Can a single command structure employ both aggressive breakthrough operations and methodical consolidated advances? Can Patton's chaos and Eisenhower's coordination coexist productively? The North African and early European campaigns suggested the answer was no. Every time Patton executed aggressive operations, he disrupted coordinated planning. Every time Eisenhower imposed systematic doctrine, he constrained Patton's tactical genius. The two approaches were not complementary, but contradictory. They could not be synthesized or balanced or managed through compromise. One had to dominate, or both would fail. The Allied High Command never resolved this question. Instead, they improvised constantly, allowing Patton freedom when desperate for victories, imposing control when political pressure required coordination. This improvisation worked well enough to win the war. Whether it worked well enough to win the war optimally remains one of history's unanswerable questions. Gela, Sicily. July 3, 1943. Dawn. Landing craft grind onto Mediterranean beaches as American soldiers of Patton's 7th Army pour ashore under sporadic German and Italian fire. The invasion has begun ahead of schedule, Patton's forces hitting the beaches with aggressive tempo that catches defenders unprepared. Within hours, beachheads are secured, engineers are clearing obstacles, and armor is moving inland. Patton himself wades ashore in the first wave, his presence captured by Army photographers, his pearl-handled pistols visible on his belt. He has waited his entire career for this moment. Independent Army command, a major amphibious operation, all the chance to prove his theories against serious resistance. The tactical situation is promising. Italian defenders are surrendering in large groups. German counterattacks are disorganized. The landing has succeeded beyond optimistic projections. Patton's aggressive planning and relentless training have paid immediate dividends, but success creates new problems. Montgomery's British 8th Army, landing to the east, is advancing more slowly, following methodical doctrine that consolidates each position carefully. Patton sees an opportunity. British doctrine gives Montgomery territorial responsibility for eastern Sicily, including the critical port of Messina. Patton's zone is western Sicily, less strategically important, but nothing in the operational plan prevents American forces from reaching Messina first if they move fast enough. Though Patton decides to race Montgomery for the objective, defying territorial boundaries and strategic coordination. He is about to win his greatest tactical victory while triggering his most devastating personal crisis. The race begins immediately. Patton drives his forces inland with relentless pressure, accepting risks that cautious commanders would refuse. His armor bypasses Italian strongpoints, leaving infantry to reduce them later. His supply convoys push forward on marginal roads, accepting higher casualties from German air attack to maintain tempo. His operational pace is brutal. Soldiers advance all day, consolidate positions at night, advance again the next morning. Within 10 days of landing, 7th Army has covered ground that planning staff estimated would require 3 weeks. Patton visits frontline units constantly. In his presence driving aggressive action, his personal example making complaints impossible. When logistics officers warn that supply lines are overstretched, he tells them to requisition local resources and keep moving. When intelligence officers warn that German defensive positions ahead are formidable, he orders them bypassed rather than attacked directly. He is executing perfect aggressive warfare, the doctrine he has advocated for 20 years. But this perfection comes with human costs that will destroy him. On July 10, 1943, at approximately 5:30 in the afternoon, Patton visits an evacuation hospital near Nicosia Airfield to boost morale and assess medical capabilities. He walks through rows of wounded soldiers, stopping to talk with individual men, thanking them for their service, praising their courage. And then he encounters Private Charles Kuhl. Kuhl sits on a hospital cot, head down, showing no visible wounds. His medical tag indicates psychoneurosis anxiety state, moderate, chronic. Modern medicine would call this post-traumatic stress disorder or combat exhaustion. 1943. Army doctrine calls it shell shock, or, more colloquially, lack of moral fiber. The distinction matters because military culture in 1943 does not recognize psychological trauma as legitimate injury. Soldiers who break under combat stress are considered cowards, weak individuals who lack the moral strength to face combat. This judgment is medically ignorant and morally cruel, but it pervades military culture completely. Patton, who has never broken under stress, Ijitsu, who has never experienced the psychological collapse that combat produces in some men, shares this cruel judgment completely. He sees Kuhl sitting on the cot and assumes he is malingering, avoiding combat by claiming psychological distress. What Patton does next will define the rest of his life. He begins shouting at Kuhl, calling him a coward and a disgrace. Then Patton slaps him across the face with his gloves. The physical assault is shocking, a general striking an enlisted man who cannot defend himself. But Patton does not stop there. He calls Cool a yellow son of a bitch and threatens to have him shot for cowardice. Medical staff freeze in horror. Wounded soldiers lying nearby watch in disbelief. Patton storms out of the hospital, apparently satisfied that he has set a proper example. Now the cover-up begins immediately, but fails quickly. Hospital Commander General Frederick Middleton witnesses the assault, but does not immediately report it through official channels. He understands that reporting a general officer for assault would require investigation, court-martial proceedings, career destruction. Instead, he files a quiet internal report, assuming the matter will be handled discreetly. But less than 1 week later, Patton visits another evacuation hospital and encounters Private Paul Bennett, another soldier suffering combat exhaustion. Patton repeats his performance, shouting, accusations of cowardice, physical assault. This time, he draws his pistol and threatens to shoot Bennett on the spot. Medical officers intervene physically, separating Patton from the terrified soldier. Now, the incidents cannot be concealed. And multiple witnesses from 2 separate hospitals have seen an Army commander assault patients under medical care. The reports reach Eisenhower's headquarters in August 1943, forcing him to investigate. What Eisenhower discovers horrifies him. Cool has served with distinction in North Africa. He has demonstrated courage repeatedly. He is genuinely suffering from acute combat trauma, not malingering. Bennett has similar record. Both soldiers have legitimate medical conditions. Patton has assaulted wounded men for being wounded. Eisenhower faces an impossible decision. Patton has just delivered the most successful American offensive operation of the war to date. 7th Army has performed brilliantly, achieving objectives ahead of schedule, defeating German and Italian forces, capturing critical territory. And removing Patton from command would look like punishing success, but allowing him to continue commanding troops after assaulting patients would look like condoning criminal behavior. Eisenhower chooses a middle path that satisfies no one. He orders Patton to apologize, formal written apologies to both soldiers, a public apology to all 7th Army medical staff, and a private apology to Eisenhower himself. Patton complies, writing letters that show genuine mortification and regret. His August 15th apology letter to Eisenhower begins with, "I am deeply regretful and I beg your forgiveness," showing vulnerability rarely visible in his public persona. But written apologies cannot contain the scandal. In November 1943, journalist Drew Pearson breaks the story in his nationally syndicated column. The slapping incident explodes across American newspapers. Editorial pages demand Patton's removal. Congressional leaders question his fitness for command. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. and Congressman Frank McCormick hold Patton up as an example of military arrogance that must be checked by civilian oversight. The exact quote from Patton to Cool, preserved in multiple witness accounts, reveals how completely Patton misunderstood psychological trauma. "You're just a coward, you yellow son of a bitch. You're a disgrace to the Army, and you're going back to the front lines, and you're going to fight." This statement assumes that combat exhaustion is moral failure rather than medical condition, that soldiers can simply choose to overcome psychological collapse through willpower. This assumption was widespread in 1943, but completely wrong. Modern understanding recognizes that exposure to sustained combat produces measurable psychological changes, that some individuals reach breaking points regardless of courage or character. That psychological trauma is injury as legitimate as physical wounds. But this understanding did not exist in military doctrine when Patton assaulted Cool and Bennett. Army investigation of the broader question revealed disturbing patterns. During the Sicily campaign, 393 soldiers were officially investigated for lack of offensive spirit, the euphemism for cowardice or shell shock. Post-war analysis determined that 95% had treatable medical conditions: combat exhaustion, undiagnosed physical injuries, fever from disease, malnutrition. The Army was systematically punishing sick and wounded soldiers for being sick and wounded. Eisenhower's response to the slapping incident reveals his fundamental calculation. He refuses to relieve Patton immediately, but issues a private reprimand stating that Patton's future usefulness is at stake. This phrasing is revealing. Eisenhower does not question Patton's past usefulness or current ability. He warns that future employment depends on avoiding further scandals. This is not moral judgment, but career management. Eisenhower is telling Patton that talent alone cannot protect him indefinitely, that political survival requires acceptable behavior, that institutional constraints eventually override tactical excellence. Patton receives this message clearly. He begins controlling his public behavior more carefully, and avoiding situations where his temper might create further incidents. But he does not change his fundamental philosophy. He continues believing that aggressive warfare requires aggressive commanders, that soldiers need harsh discipline to maintain combat effectiveness, that his methods work even if they create political problems. The slapping incident has taught him to be more careful. It has not taught him to be different. The deeper question raised by the slapping incident is whether it proves Patton was fundamentally unfit for command, or whether it was an aberration in an otherwise exemplary record. His defenders argue that the incident was an isolated mistake, a moment of poor judgment under enormous stress, not representative of his overall leadership. They point to his genuine remorse, his immediate apologies, and his subsequent efforts to understand combat psychology. His critics argue that the incident revealed Patton's essential character: arrogant, cruel, unable to empathize with soldiers suffering under his command. They point to his repeated behavior in 2 separate hospitals, his willingness to assault vulnerable men, his assumption that psychological trauma was moral weakness. The evidence supports both interpretations partially. Patton did show genuine remorse and did try to make amends. But he also never fully accepted that psychological trauma was a legitimate medical condition, continued viewing combat exhaustion with suspicion, maintained his belief that harsh discipline produced effective fighting spirit. The ultimate impact of the slapping incident was political rather than military. Patton's tactical abilities remained intact. His understanding of mechanized warfare remained superior. His capacity to drive aggressive operations remained unmatched among American commanders. But his political vulnerability became permanent. Any future mistake, any subsequent controversy, any additional scandal would be evaluated in light of the slapping incident. The incident became a weapon his critics could use indefinitely, a permanent stain on his reputation that would outlive his tactical victories. Patton understood this dimly. He knew he had created permanent enemies. He knew his career now depended on delivering victories so overwhelming that political opposition could not remove him. This knowledge would drive his increasingly desperate attempts to prove his value through military success. The slapping incident did not end Patton's career immediately, but it ensured that his career would end badly, that political forces would eventually overcome tactical excellence, that the general who refused to wait for permission would eventually pay the full price for his independence. The soldiers Patton slapped would carry their own scars. Cool and Bennett both returned to duty after medical treatment. Both served honorably for the remainder of the war. Both refused to discuss the incident publicly for decades. When journalists later tracked them down for interviews, both expressed complicated feelings: anger at being assaulted, understanding that Patton was under enormous pressure, pride at serving in 7th Army, lingering resentment at institutional betrayal. They were victims of Patton's cruelty and symbols of military culture's failure to recognize psychological trauma. Their stories are footnotes in Patton's biography, but central to their own lives. The slapping incident destroyed Patton's career trajectory and traumatized 2 soldiers who deserved better. Neither outcome was necessary. Both were consequences of institutional ignorance about combat psychology and command arrogance about soldiers' well-being. The incident was tragedy for everyone involved. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, July 15, 1943. 11 o'clock at night. A coded message arrives at Patton's command post in Sicily. Eisenhower's words are carefully chosen, professionally measured, but their meaning is stark. Patton can keep his command on one condition: Sicily must fall quickly. The message does not explicitly mention the slapping incident, does not threaten court-martial or relief. Agin does not enumerate consequences. It does not need to. Both men understand that Patton's career survival now depends entirely on delivering such overwhelming military success that the slapping scandal becomes footnote rather than career epitaph. Eisenhower has given Patton conditional redemption. Now, Patton must prove he deserves it. The standard by which he will be judged is brutal. He must conquer an entire island defended by German and Italian forces, must do it faster than planning timelines suggested, must do it with fewer casualties than cautious doctrine would accept. He must win decisively, dramatically, quickly. Anything less will end his career. Patton reads the message carefully, folds it without expression, and begins planning his redemption through violence. The operational situation is both opportunity and trap. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army is advancing up Sicily's eastern coast toward Messina, following methodical doctrine that consolidates each position carefully. The original operational plan assigns Montgomery the main effort, with American forces playing supporting role in western Sicily. Patton's assigned objective is Palermo, a major port city on the island's northwestern coast, strategically useful but not decisive. Montgomery's objective is Messina, the port city controlling the strait between Sicily and mainland Italy, the prize that matters strategically. Taking Palermo will not redeem Patton's reputation. Taking Palermo while Montgomery takes Messina will make American efforts look secondary to British operations. Patton needs to reach Messina first, needs to beat Montgomery to the objective, always needs to prove that American aggressive tactics are superior to British methodical advance. This requires ignoring his assigned role, exceeding his operational authority, potentially creating diplomatic crisis with Britain, but Patton has already destroyed his career through the slapping incident. He has nothing left to lose by gambling everything on tactical audacity. Palermo. July 22nd, 1943. Patton's forces enter the city after a rapid thrust across western Sicily that has covered 150 miles in 6 days of brutal combat. The advance has been relentless, Patton driving his commanders, who drive their subordinates, who drive their soldiers to advance despite exhaustion, despite heat, despite casualties. Italian defenders have fought sporadically, German units have conducted skilled delaying actions, but nothing has stopped 7th Army's momentum. Patton enters Palermo in his command jeep, photographers capturing the moment of triumph, his expression vindicated and fierce. He has taken his assigned objective ahead of schedule with fewer casualties than planning staff projected. The tactical success is undeniable, but Palermo is not Messina. Palermo does not end the campaign. Taking Palermo faster than projected is impressive but not decisive. Patton knows this. He uses Palermo as staging area, not destination. While Montgomery continues methodical advance up the eastern coast, fighting for every strong point, Patton wheels 7th Army northeast toward Messina. He is racing Montgomery now, competing openly, determined to reach the decisive objective first, regardless of diplomatic consequences or strategic coordination. The race to Messina becomes epic. From July 23rd through August 16th, Patton drives 7th Army forward with unrelenting pressure. The Army covers 150 miles of mountainous terrain in brutal summer heat, fighting German rearguard actions at every defensible position. Soldiers march all day, sleep 4 hours, march again the next day. Supply convoys push forward on narrow mountain roads, vulnerable to German artillery, but essential to maintaining tempo. Casualties mount steadily. Soldiers fall to enemy fire, to heat exhaustion, to simple physical collapse from sustained exertion. Medical officers warn that the operational pace is unsustainable. Logistics officers report fuel and ammunition shortages. And intelligence officers note that German defenders are conducting skilled delaying operations that could slow American advance indefinitely if allowed to establish proper defensive lines. Patton ignores every warning. He visits frontline units daily, personally ordering tired commanders to keep advancing, relieving officers who suggest consolidation, pushing relentlessly toward Messina. His command style is brutal, effective, possibly criminal in its disregard for soldier welfare. But it is working. 7th Army is advancing faster than Montgomery's 8th Army, despite facing comparable German resistance and much more difficult terrain. Messina, August 17th, 1943. Patton's forward units enter the city at dawn, hours before Montgomery's British forces arrive from the south. The race is over. Patton has won. He holds an impromptu press conference in Messina's ruins, photographers capturing his triumphant expression, correspondents recording his carefully chosen words about American fighting spirit and aggressive tactics. The message is implicit but clear. American methods have succeeded where British caution has fallen short. Montgomery arrives hours later to find American flags already flying over Messina's port facilities. The diplomatic embarrassment is acute. British newspapers complain that Patton ignored strategic coordination to pursue personal glory. American newspapers celebrate a decisive victory that validates aggressive American military culture. Eisenhower is caught between celebrating success and managing diplomatic crisis. Or he chooses to publicly praise Patton's operational achievement while privately cautioning him about strategic cooperation. His August 20th letter to Patton carefully balances these requirements. Your prompt action in getting into Palermo and your subsequent aggressive and skillful drive northward have contributed materially to the success of this operation. The phrasing acknowledges tactical excellence while avoiding any suggestion that Patton's methods should become standard doctrine. The military statistics from the Sicily campaign provide context for Patton's redemption. 7th Army consisted of approximately 90,000 men and 594 tanks, a force equivalent to a small nation's entire military. During the 5-week campaign from initial landings to Messina's capture, its 7th Army suffered 2,237 soldiers killed and 8,946 wounded. These casualties were substantial, but significantly lower than pessimistic projections had suggested. German and Italian forces defending Sicily lost more than 12,600 killed or captured, suffered even higher wounded totals, and lost control of strategically vital Mediterranean island. The casualty ratio favored Allied forces decisively, vindicating Patton's aggressive tactics. More importantly, the operational tempo metric revealed Patton's fundamental innovation. American forces typically consolidated territory carefully before advancing, achieving average advance rates of 2.4 miles per day across North African campaigns. Then Patton's 7th Army averaged 12.3 miles per day during Sicily's pursuit phase, more than 5 times the norm. This acceleration was not merely faster movement, but fundamentally different operational art, breakthrough warfare that disrupted enemy planning through unrelenting tempo. The geographic challenge made Patton's achievement more impressive. Sicily's terrain features mountainous interior, narrow coastal roads, ancient villages that provide natural defensive positions, heat that exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit regularly. This terrain favors defensive warfare, allowing small forces to delay much larger attacking formations through prepared positions and skilled rearguard actions. German forces defending Sicily exploited these advantages expertly, conducting fighting withdrawals that inflicted maximum casualties while buying time for main forces to escape to mainland Italy. Against these professional opponents in unfavorable terrain, Patton's rapid advance represented tactical mastery. He bypassed strong points instead of reducing them, used naval gunfire to suppress coastal defenses, employed aggressive night movements to flank prepared positions. Every tactical innovation served the operational goal of maintaining tempo, keeping German forces constantly retreating rather than defending. Montgomery's forces, advancing through equally difficult terrain against equally skilled opponents, moved more slowly because they reduced each strong point methodically before advancing. This took more time, but produced fewer casualties per mile advanced. The methodologies were different, not necessarily better or worse, but Patton's approach reached the strategic objective first. Montgomery's formal complaint reveals the depth of disagreement over Patton's methods. On August 10, 1943, Montgomery writes to General Harold Alexander, commanding Allied ground forces in Sicily, that Patton is bypassing defensive positions instead of neutralizing them. This is reckless. Montgomery's criticism is not wrong tactically. Bypassing defensive positions does leave enemy forces in American rear areas, does create potential vulnerability to counterattack, does complicate supply operations. But Montgomery's criticism also reveals his fundamental assumption that warfare should minimize risk through systematic neutralization of threats. Patton's counter-argument, and never stated directly to Montgomery, but clear in his operational decisions, is that speed creates its own security, that bypassed positions become irrelevant once the front line moves far beyond them, that delayed enemy forces cannot threaten rapid advances before those advances achieve decisive objectives. Both philosophies are coherent. Both can cite tactical examples supporting their logic, but they cannot both be correct simultaneously. The question of which approach was superior remained contested throughout the war. Patton's personal response to his redemption through Sicily's conquest reveals his understanding of career dynamics. He knows the slapping incident has not been forgotten, that political enemies will use it against him at the first opportunity, that his survival depends on remaining militarily indispensable. His correspondence from August 1943 shows relief mixed with determination. He has survived immediate crisis, but not resolved underlying vulnerability. Eisenhower's conditional support means Patton must continue delivering exceptional results to maintain his command. One more scandal, one more political crisis, one more failure to subordinate personal judgment to strategic coordination will end his career regardless of tactical excellence. Patton understands this calculation. He does not accept it philosophically, but recognizes it pragmatically. He begins controlling his public behavior more carefully, avoiding situations that might create new scandals, managing his volcanic temper with greater effort. But fundamental disagreements with Eisenhower's cautious doctrine remain unresolved. Sicily has granted Patton temporary survival. It has not granted permanent security. His redemption is conditional, his future contingent, his career balanced on the edge of exceptional performance and political disaster. The slapping incident will never fully disappear from Patton's biography, even as he leads armies across France and Germany, even as he delivers operational masterpieces that military historians will study for generations. The image of a general assaulting a wounded soldier will shadow his reputation. Sicily's conquest has bought him time, but not absolution. The next crisis will come. Whether Patton can survive, it remains uncertain. For now, in late August 1943, he has proven that aggressive warfare can produce decisive victories, that his controversial methods can achieve strategic objectives, that Eisenhower's decision to keep him in command was militarily justified. But questions remain about whether that decision was morally justified, whether operational excellence excuses personal cruelty, whether military institutions should tolerate exceptional commanders who violate basic standards of human decency. These questions have no simple answers. They will follow Patton for the rest of his life and beyond. Fort Sam, Houston, Texas. January 1944. George Patton stands in an empty headquarters building, reading orders that should represent honor but feel like exile. He has been assigned to command 1st United States Army Group, a formation that will spearhead the invasion of Europe. The appointment sounds prestigious. Division commanders across the Army envy the assignment. But Patton understands immediately that something is wrong. 1st Army Group does not exist yet as a functioning organization. Its headquarters staff is skeletal. Its assigned divisions remain scattered across the United States and Britain. The timeline for activation seems deliberately vague. Patton's diary entry from this period reveals his fury. They have given me an army that does not exist to prepare for an invasion they will not let me lead. This is punishment disguised as promotion. He is correct. Eisenhower and the combined chiefs of staff are removing Patton from active combat command while maintaining the public appearance that he remains essential to Allied operations. The slapping incident has made him too politically controversial to command actual invasion forces. Yes, but his reputation makes him too valuable to dismiss entirely. The solution is exile disguised as honor. Give him a command that sounds important, but keeps him away from actual combat until the political situation stabilizes. The truth behind 1st Army Group becomes clear in February 1944, when Patton receives classified briefings on Operation Fortitude. This is not preparation for invasion. This is preparation for deception. Allied intelligence has determined that German High Command considers Patton the most dangerous American general, the commander most likely to lead the main invasion effort. This assessment, based on intercepted German communications and decoded signals intelligence, reveals that Nazi leadership respects Patton's aggressive reputation more than any other Allied commander. The Allies intend to exploit this respect through strategic deception. Patton will command 1st Army Group, but 1st Army Group will be a phantom formation, a fictional force designed to convince Germans that the main invasion will strike Pas de Calais instead of Normandy. The deception will employ inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, dummy airfields, and Patton's presence as the centerpiece of the illusion. If German intelligence believes Patton commands a massive force in southeastern England, they will keep substantial forces defending Pas de Calais even after the actual invasion begins in Normandy. Patton is being transformed from commander into theater prop, from warrior into actor performing for enemy intelligence services. The scale of Operation Fortitude is staggering. By March 1944, Patton's Phantom Army includes 250 inflatable tanks that appear real in aerial reconnaissance photographs, 600 fake landing craft constructed from wooden frames and canvas, dummy airfields at Dover, complete with plywood aircraft, and more than 400 radio transmitters sending false traffic that simulates divisional-level communications. The deception extends beyond physical props to bureaucratic theater. Real soldiers are assigned to 1st Army Group headquarters, creating genuine administrative traffic that German signals intelligence can intercept. Supply requisitions are filed for a fictional force, creating logistics patterns that suggest major invasion preparation. The operation is brilliant strategically and humiliating personally for Patton. He is commanding an army that exists primarily as enemy delusion. His presence in England is not about preparing forces for combat, but about being visible enough that German intelligence confirms his location. He must attend public events, make speeches, allow himself to be photographed, all to reinforce German conviction that he commands the main invasion force. German intelligence assessment from May 26, 1944, obtained through post-war document recovery, reveals the deception's complete success. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding German forces in Western Europe, believes Eisenhower's main invasion force consists of approximately 75 divisions under General Patton's command, positioned in southeast England for assault across the Dover Strait to Pas de Calais. This assessment is entirely wrong. The actual invasion force is smaller and commanded by Montgomery, targeting Normandy beaches 200 miles west of German expectations. But German intelligence has built their entire defensive strategy around the phantom threat Patton represents. They maintain 15 full divisions at Pas de Calais, forces that could decisively influence the Normandy battle if deployed there immediately after Allied landings. Instead, those 15 divisions wait at Pas de Calais for Patton's Phantom Army to attack, remaining in position for weeks after the actual invasion begins. Operation Fortitude has effectively removed 15 German divisions from the battlefield without firing a shot. Patton's name alone has been worth more than 5 actual divisions to the Allied campaign. That Patton's private response to this assignment reveals his tortured psychology. His April 1944 protest to Eisenhower is anguished. "I did not come to this theater to sit in a command post 50 miles from combat. This is torture, not soldiering." The statement exposes Patton's fundamental identity crisis. He defines himself as warrior, as combat commander who leads from the front, as aggressive tactician who shapes battles through personal presence. Operation Fortitude requires him to be something entirely different, a symbol, a reputation, a name on German intelligence reports. He must command fictionally rather than actually, must influence battle through absence rather than presence. This psychological reversal is devastating for someone who has spent his entire life preparing for direct command. Patton understands intellectually that Operation Fortitude serves critical strategic purpose, that deceiving German intelligence will save thousands of Allied lives. But understanding strategic necessity does not make psychological humiliation less painful. He is protecting Allied soldiers by not commanding them, winning battles by not fighting them, serving his nation by doing nothing except being visible. Eisenhower personally visits Patton in May 1944 to manage his temperament and ensure he does not create another scandal that could compromise the deception. The meeting is difficult. Eisenhower must convince Patton that this assignment is genuinely important while acknowledging that it is also punishment for the slapping incident. His classified memo to Patton from April reveals this delicate balance. Your presence here is worth more than 5 divisions to the campaign. I need you to stay until the deception purpose is served. The phrasing is carefully chosen. Eisenhower is telling Patton that the assignment is strategically valuable while implicitly acknowledging it is personally degrading. The memo also contains implicit threat. If Patton creates any scandal that draws attention to his actual role or location, the deception will fail and he will be held responsible. Patton is trapped between conflicting requirements. He must remain publicly visible to convince German intelligence he is preparing invasion, but he must avoid creating any controversy that might expose Operation Fortitude's deceptive nature. This requires more self-control than Patton has ever demonstrated consistently. The timeline of Patton's exile reveals its punitive nature. He remains assigned to 1st Army Group for 5 months, from January through early July 1944. This is longer than any of his active combat commands to date. He has commanded 2nd Corps for 3 months in North Africa, 7th Army for 2 months in Sicily, but he commands the Phantom 1st Army Group for 5 months, a period during which actual Allied forces invade Normandy, establish beachheads, break out into France. Patton watches from England as other commanders execute the operations he has trained his entire career to lead. Omar Bradley, his former subordinate, commands actual invasion forces. Montgomery, his hated rival, directs ground operations. D. Courtney Hodges leads 1st Army in combat, while Patton leads a fictional army in deception. The exile is professionally devastating and personally humiliating. Every day he remains in England is another day proving he is too controversial for actual command, too politically damaged to be trusted with real soldiers. The slapping incident has transformed America's most aggressive general into a strategic theater prop. The deeper irony of Operation Fortitude is that Patton's enforced inactivity serves Allied interests more effectively than his aggressive command style could have. If Patton had commanded actual invasion forces at Normandy, he would have employed his characteristic aggressive tactics: rapid advances, bypass strong points, relentless pursuit. These tactics would have been effective tactically, but potentially disastrous strategically. The Normandy invasion required careful coordination of naval gunfire, air support, engineering operations, logistics buildup. Patton's aggressive style would have disrupted this coordination, created vulnerabilities, potentially invited German counterattacks that could have destroyed beachheads. By keeping Patton in England commanding nothing, Eisenhower ensured both that the deception worked and that the invasion proceeded according to careful doctrine without Patton's disruptive influence. This calculation was strategically brilliant and personally cruel. Patton was serving Allied victory through enforced absence, protecting soldiers by not commanding them, contributing through inaction rather than action. The psychological cost of this exile becomes visible in Patton's correspondence and diary entries from spring 1944. He writes to his wife Beatrice that he feels useless and forgotten, despite knowing intellectually that Operation Fortitude serves vital purpose. He complains that history will record Montgomery and Bradley as the invasion's architects while Patton's contribution remains classified and invisible. He worries that political enemies are using his absence to marginalize him permanently, that he will never receive another combat command, that his career will end not with dramatic relief, but with quiet exile to training commands far from actual war. These fears are not entirely paranoid. The slapping incident has created permanent political vulnerability. Eisenhower's willingness to assign Patton to Operation Fortitude demonstrates his recognition that Patton cannot be trusted with politically sensitive commands. The exile may be temporary, or it may be indefinite. Patton cannot know. He can only wait, command his Phantom Army, make speeches for German intelligence to intercept, and hope that Eisenhower eventually decides he is redeemable enough for actual combat command. The ultimate assessment of Operation Fortitude reveals both its strategic success and its personal cost. The deception worked brilliantly. German forces remained at Pas de Calais for weeks after Normandy landings, exactly as Allied planners hoped. Those 15 divisions absent from Normandy beaches potentially made the difference between successful invasion and catastrophic defeat. Patton's presence in England, in his public visibility, his phantom army, all contributed materially to Allied victory in ways that actual combat command could not have achieved. But this success came at devastating personal cost. Patton spent 5 months doing nothing, while other commanders fought battles he believed he should lead. He was exiled from combat during the most important operation of the war, removed from active command at precisely the moment when his tactical genius could have been most valuable. History would later recognize Operation Fortitude as strategic masterpiece, but Patton would remember it as his most humiliating assignment, the period when political liability outweighed tactical excellence, when the general who refused to wait for permission was forced to wait endlessly for redemption that might never come. Saint-Lô, France, June 28, 1944. General George Patton finally sets foot on the French soil, 7 weeks after the Normandy invasion began without him. He assumes command of Third Army, a formation that has been training in England while other forces fought and bled to establish beachheads. The battlefield he inherits is not the sweeping mechanized warfare he is prepared for, but grinding attrition that resembles the worst trenches of World War I. American forces are stuck in bocage country, a nightmarish landscape of sunken roads and thick hedgerows that transform every field into a natural fortress. German defenders exploit this terrain brilliantly, turning each hedge into a defensive position that must be reduced by infantry assault. Allied forces are suffering more than 3,000 casualties per week, while advancing mere hundreds of yards. The breakthrough Patton has advocated for 20 years seems impossible in terrain, designed by nature to prevent breakthrough. Eisenhower's methodical doctrine should work perfectly here. Careful reduction of each position, systematic advance, consolidated lines. But it is not working. Casualties are mounting while territorial gains remain minimal. The campaign is stalling. Patton sees this immediately and proposes immediate offensive toward Avranches and Brittany, aggressive breakthrough that would bypass the bocage entirely by flanking German defensive positions. The proposal is vintage Patton. Identify the enemy's strength, avoid attacking it directly, maneuver to create vulnerability, exploit through rapid movement. But Eisenhower rejects the plan in favor of accumulating strength. The doctrine of building up forces until overwhelming superiority makes breakthrough inevitable. This rejection reveals the fundamental strategic divide that has plagued Allied command since North Africa. Eisenhower believes victory comes through systematic preparation and overwhelming force. Patton believes victory comes through speed and surprise that prevent enemy from establishing prepared defenses. The disagreement is not personal or petty. It represents genuinely different theories about how modern war should be conducted. Eisenhower's approach minimizes risk through careful preparation. Patton's approach minimizes casualties through rapid conclusion. Both philosophies are coherent. Both can cite historical precedents, but only one can guide actual operations, and Eisenhower commands. His decision to accumulate strength that rather than breakthrough immediately means American forces will continue grinding through bocage, suffering heavy casualties, giving Germans time to reinforce defensive positions. Patton watches this unfold with increasing fury. Convinced that Eisenhower's caution is costing American lives that aggressive tactics would save. Operation Cobra, July 25, 1944. The breakout finally begins with massive aerial bombardment that devastates German defensive positions near Saint-Lô. Allied bombers drop thousands of tons of high explosives in concentrated area, attempting to blast a gap in German lines that ground forces can exploit. The bombardment is partially successful, creating disruption and confusion among German defenders. But it also kills dozens of American soldiers when bombs fall short, a tragedy that would have stalled operations under cautious doctrine. Instead, Patton coordinates rapid advance that exploits the gap before Germans can recover. His forces push through shattered German positions, bypass strong points, race toward open country beyond the bocage. This is the moment Patton has been preparing for since 1920, breakthrough in progress, enemy disorganized, opportunity for pursuit. But he is immediately frustrated by slowness of follow-up reinforcements. Eisenhower's doctrine requires consolidation before exploitation, careful preparation before major movements. Patton's doctrine requires immediate exploitation before enemy recovers. Then the contradiction produces operational confusion as Third Army tries to advance rapidly, while other formations move methodically. August 1st, 1944. Third Army officially activates with Patton in command of 180,000 troops, 640 tanks, 650 artillery pieces. This is the army he has spent his career preparing to lead. Mobile, aggressive, trained in breakthrough operations. He immediately begins operations that contradict Eisenhower's phased approach. SHAEF planners have outlined careful sequence, breakthrough bocage, consolidate positions, advance toward Brittany to capture ports, then turn east toward Paris. Patton ignores the sequence. He attacks toward Brittany and Le Mans simultaneously, dividing his forces in ways that violate established doctrine but exploit German confusion. When challenged by Eisenhower's staff, Patton argues that, "I know what the enemy is going to do better than Chef does," and that waiting for permission means waiting for opportunity to disappear. This response is both tactically astute and insubordinate. Patton is correct that German forces are disorganized and vulnerable to aggressive exploitation, but he is also refusing to follow strategic guidance from theater command, substituting his tactical judgment for strategic direction. The friction intensifies on August 8th at Vire, when Patton directly confronts Eisenhower's micromanagement. Third Army has advanced spectacularly, covering ground in days that planning staffs thought would require weeks. But this success has created supply problems. The SHAEF logistics officers calculate that maintaining multiple advancing armies requires distributing fuel and ammunition evenly across the entire theater. Patton's aggressive operations are consuming disproportionate supplies, threatening to leave other armies unable to advance. The logistics argument is mathematically sound. If Patton continues consuming fuel at current rates, other American armies will run out of gasoline and stall completely. But Patton's counter-argument is strategically compelling. If Third Army maintains its advance, it can reach the Seine River and cut off German retreat routes, potentially ending the campaign weeks earlier than planned. The debate is not about arithmetic, but about strategic philosophy. Should supplies be distributed evenly to maintain coordinated advance, or concentrated to exploit breakthrough opportunity? Eisenhower chooses distribution. Patton chooses exploitation. The conflict becomes crisis. The supply constraints was real and devastating. Eisenhower's broad front strategy required distributing logistics across all advancing formations, ensuring no army outpaced its supply lines so drastically that it became vulnerable to counterattack. This approach made operational sense for coordinated campaign, but frustrated tactical opportunities. Patton's concentrated offensive required 340% of allocated fuel supplies, a level that could only be sustained by reducing other armies' allocations. SHAEF supply officers calculated precisely what this meant. If Third Army received the fuel Patton demanded, First Army would have to halt, and Seventh Army would have to consolidate defensive positions. An Allied advance would become single thrust rather than broad pressure. The mathematics were irrefutable, but mathematics measure resources, not opportunities. Patton's exact claim in private correspondence captures his frustration. "We could reach the Seine in 10 days if Schaff would stop micromanaging and let me pursue aggressively." He was probably correct. Third Army's operational tempo suggested that rapid advance to the Seine was achievable if fuel supplies continued at July levels. But achieving that advance would have required accepting risks Eisenhower considered unacceptable. The geographic reality of Brittany reveals another source of friction. The Brittany Peninsula extends 130 miles west of the main advance toward Germany, requiring substantial forces to capture ports that Schaff planners believed essential for long-term logistics. Patton's aggressive sweep through Rennes, Vannes, and Lorient covered 240 miles in 18 days, spectacular mobility that validated his tactical approach. But this advance also diverted forces away from the primary objective of destroying German armies and advancing toward Germany. The strategic question was whether Brittany's ports justified the diversion, whether capturing supply facilities was worth delaying pursuit of retreating German forces. Patton argued the ports were irrelevant because aggressive pursuit would end the campaign before logistics became limiting factor. Schaff argued the ports were essential because overextension without secure supply bases would invite catastrophic counterattack. And as both arguments had merit, neither could be proven correct without actually executing one approach and discovering the consequences. Schaff's supply officer's report from August 5th laid out the mathematics brutally. Third Army's fuel consumption is 340% above allocation due to aggressive maneuver. This cannot be sustained without reducing other armies' supply. The report recommended reducing Patton's fuel allocation to planned levels, accepting slower advance in exchange for sustainable logistics. Eisenhower approved this recommendation, establishing the policy that would govern operations for the remainder of the campaign. Fuel would be distributed according to theater plan, not tactical opportunity. This decision prioritized certainty over speed, coordination over exploitation. It ensured that Allied advance would proceed methodically, but prevented the kind of breakthrough pursuit that Patton had demonstrated was possible. The decision was strategically defensible and tactically frustrating. It meant German forces would have time to establish new defensive lines, that pursuit would slow to the pace of logistics rather than the pace of opportunity, that the war would last longer than Patton believed necessary. Patton's response to these constraints revealed his growing desperation and isolation. His diary entries from August show escalating frustration. They are afraid of their own success. We are winning, and they want to slow down to make sure we keep winning slowly. This assessment was harsh, but partially accurate. Eisenhower's strategic caution did slow Third Army's advance below what was tactically possible. But that caution also prevented the kind of operational disaster that aggressive overextension could have produced. Patton was gambling that speed would solve logistics problems through rapid victory. Eisenhower was avoiding gambles that could lose the entire campaign. Both positions were rational. Both could cite military history supporting their approach. But only one could govern actual operations, and Eisenhower commanded. His decision to constrain Patton's aggression meant accepting longer campaign in exchange for higher probability of success. The broader pattern emerging from these August conflicts was identical to the pattern established in North Africa and Sicily. Patton would identify tactical opportunities, exploit them aggressively, deliver spectacular results, and create strategic problems. Eisenhower would manage those problems diplomatically, preserve operational coordination, maintain sustainable logistics, and privately resent that his most effective commander was also his most difficult subordinate. The pattern was productive in that it won battles. The pattern was destructive in that it prevented either commander from fully implementing his preferred strategy. Patton never received the freedom to execute pure breakthrough operations. Eisenhower never achieved the coordinated advance he preferred. Both commanders compromised constantly, neither achieving optimal results, both frustrated by constraints the other imposed. This was coalition warfare's inevitable friction. It's the cost of combining aggressive field commanders with cautious theater management. The friction produced Allied victory. Whether it produced optimal Allied victory remained unanswerable. The ultimate question raised by the August conflicts was whether Eisenhower could actually afford to rein in his most effective aggressive commander. The evidence suggested he could not. Every time Eisenhower imposed logistical constraints, Patton found ways to continue advancing through improvisation and calculated risk. Every time Schaff established doctrine prioritizing coordination, Patton substituted tactical opportunism and delivered results. The dynamics suggested that Patton's apparent insubordination was actually essential to Allied success, that his willingness to bypass orders and exploit opportunities was producing victories that strict obedience to doctrine would not achieve. But this conclusion was institutionally intolerable. Military organizations cannot function if subordinate commanders routinely ignore direction from theater command. Eisenhower had to enforce compliance or lose authority over entire campaign. His efforts to control Patton were not petty micromanagement, but essential command function. The tragedy was that controlling Patton meant constraining the operational art that was delivering Allied victories. Neither solution was satisfactory. Both commanders would struggle with this contradiction until war's end. Alençon, France. August 12, 1944. Patton's Third Army has just achieved one of the war's most brilliant tactical maneuvers. His forces have swung south and east from their breakthrough positions, racing around German defensive lines, cutting off retreat routes from Normandy. The German 7th Army and elements of 5th Panzer Army, approximately 140,000 soldiers with more than 600 tanks, suddenly find themselves trapped in a rapidly closing pocket between American forces advancing from the south, British and Canadian forces pressing from the north, and their own overextended positions in western Normandy. This is the operational dream Patton has pursued since 1920. Enemy forces caught in mobile encirclement, unable to establish coherent defense, vulnerable to destruction through aggressive pursuit. The Falaise pocket is forming, and Patton's forces are positioned to close the trap completely. But at precisely this moment of maximum opportunity, strategic disagreement between Allied commanders will allow thousands of German soldiers to escape, transforming brilliant encirclement into incomplete victory. The consequences of command discord are about to be measured in enemy divisions that survive to fight again. The tactical situation on August 13th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon is both promising and precarious. Patton has reached Alençon and wants to drive north toward Argentan, a town approximately 15 miles south of Falaise. If Third Army captures Argentan and continues north to link with Canadian forces advancing south from Falaise, the pocket will close completely, trapping the entire German force inside an inescapable ring. Patton's forward commanders report that the route to Argentan is lightly defended, is that rapid advance could reach the town within hours. That opportunity exists for complete encirclement if movement begins immediately. Patton orders the advance, but is immediately countermanded by higher headquarters. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, coordinating Allied ground forces, orders Patton to halt at Alençon. Montgomery insists that British and Canadian forces will close the pocket from the north and east, that American forces should remain in blocking positions rather than advancing into territory assigned to Commonwealth units. This decision reflects Montgomery's preference for careful boundaries and coordinated operations, but it also reflects the deeper command friction that has plagued Allied operations throughout the campaign. The heated exchanges between August 13th and 15th reveal how command relationships break down under operational pressure. Patton argues through Omar Bradley that we can close the pocket in 24 hours if given freedom to advance, that American forces are positioned perfectly for rapid exploitation. That delay will allow Germans to widen the gap and escape. Montgomery insists on proper encirclement procedures, arguing that coordinated approach from multiple directions will ensure complete enemy destruction while preventing friendly fire between advancing Allied units. Both arguments have tactical merit. Patton's aggressive approach could close the pocket quickly, but risks American and Canadian units accidentally engaging each other in confused close combat. Montgomery's coordinated approach ensures clear boundaries, but gives Germans time to organize breakout attempts. The debate is not resolved through military logic, but through command hierarchy. Montgomery, as ground forces coordinator, orders Patton to halt. Eisenhower, unwilling to overrule Montgomery and create Allied diplomatic crisis, supports the decision. Patton halts at Alençon while the gap remains open. August 17, 1944. Patton finally receives permission to advance toward Argentan, but 3 critical days have passed. German forces have used this time to organize desperate breakout attempts, concentrating remaining armor and infantry for coordinated thrusts toward the Trun Gap, the narrow corridor through which escape remains possible. American forces advance aggressively once released, fighting fierce engagements with German rearguards, attempting to hold escape routes open. Canadian forces advance from the north, suffering heavy casualties against determined resistance. The pocket is closing, but closing slowly, methodically, exactly as Montgomery's doctrine prescribed. By the time Allied forces finally link up on August 21st, approximately 20,000 to 25,000 German soldiers have escaped through the Trun Gap. Another 50,000 have been captured, 10,000 killed, 1,500 tanks and self-propelled guns destroyed or abandoned. The Falaise pocket represents substantial Allied victory, devastating German losses, critical weakening of Wehrmacht, defensive capabilities. But it is incomplete victory. A victory that could have been more decisive if Patton had been allowed to close the trap 3 days earlier. The force composition trapped in the pocket reveals what was at stake. German 7th Army began the Normandy campaign with approximately 80,000 men. 5th Panzer Army contributed approximately 60,000 men and 650 tanks, the largest concentration of German armor remaining in Western Europe. These forces represented Germany's ability to conduct mobile defensive operations, to counterattack Allied advances, to delay Allied approach to German border. Destroying these forces completely would have shortened the war measurably, allowing 20 to 25,000 soldiers to escape, particularly the veterans and experienced officers who escaped first while ordering subordinates to hold positions. 8 meant those forces would reorganize as effective defensive units within weeks. The escaped soldiers formed the nucleus of reconstituted 5th Panzer Army, conducting skilled delaying actions through Belgium and the Netherlands that extended the war an estimated 4 to 6 weeks beyond what complete destruction at Falaise might have achieved. The casualty statistics from the Falaise breakout attempts demonstrate the ferocity of German determination to escape. German forces lost approximately 2,000 killed, 5,000 wounded, and 1,500 tanks or self-propelled guns destroyed during the breakout fighting. These losses were inflicted primarily by Allied air power and artillery, not ground combat, because German forces concentrated in narrow corridors where they became vulnerable to bombardment. American, British, and Canadian forces suffered approximately 1,500 killed and 3,200 wounded while closing the pocket, casualties that resulted from German rearguard actions and desperate counterattacks. The exchange ratio favored Allies decisively, but not as decisively as complete encirclement would have produced. The strategic cost of the escape was measured not in immediate casualties, but in future capability. The 20,000 escaped soldiers became defensive specialists who inflicted disproportionate casualties on Allied forces advancing through Belgium, the Netherlands, and eventually Germany itself. The post-war analysis provides devastating judgment on the command decisions that allowed the escape. Montgomery's chief of staff, writing in classified after-action assessment, B admits that the gap could have been closed on August 14th if Patton had been given freedom to advance. His argument was militarily correct, but our commander's judgment prevailed. This statement is remarkable for its honesty and its implications. A senior British officer is acknowledging that British command decisions, not tactical necessity, allowed German forces to escape. Montgomery's preference for coordinated operations over aggressive exploitation directly caused incomplete victory. The assessment continues. The escaped German forces reorganized within 3 weeks and conducted effective defensive operations that extended the campaign. A complete destruction at Falaise would have advanced the war's conclusion significantly. This conclusion is not American propaganda or Patton's self-justification, but British official analysis acknowledging that command discord produced strategic consequences. The deeper question is whether Patton's earlier aggressive tactics actually created the encirclement opportunity in the first place. The answer is unambiguously yes. Patton's rapid advance south and east from the Cobra breakout had caught German forces completely by surprise, cutting their retreat routes before they understood the threat. His willingness to bypass strong points and accept logistical risk had produced the operational tempo necessary to trap large German formations. Montgomery's methodical approach from the north had advanced steadily but slowly, not giving Germans time to recognize the developing threat. The encirclement opportunity existed because Patton had moved faster than German planning anticipated, but the incomplete exploitation of that opportunity occurred because Montgomery imposed methodical doctrine at the critical moment. The Falaise pocket thus became perfect demonstration of how aggressive tactics create opportunities that cautious exploitation wastes. Patton's personal response to the Falaise outcome combined vindication and fury. He had been proven tactically correct. His aggressive maneuver had created the decisive opportunity, but he had been prevented from exploiting that opportunity fully. His diary entries from late August express bitter satisfaction. "I trapped them, and Montgomery let them escape. History will show who was right." This prediction was accurate. Military historians analyzing Falaise consistently conclude that Patton's aggressive approach created the encirclement, while Montgomery's cautious coordination allowed partial escape. But Patton's vindication came too late to affect the campaign. The escaped German forces would cost Allied lives throughout the autumn fighting. The war would last longer because command friction had prevented decisive victory. Patton was right, Montgomery was wrong, and thousands of soldiers would die because institutional politics valued coordination over results. The ultimate lesson of Falaise is that strategic disagreement between commanders produces tactical consequences measured in lives. The debate between aggressive exploitation and coordinated operations was not academic but immediate. Patton's philosophy would have closed the pocket completely, in destroying German capability for mobile defense, potentially shortening the war by weeks. Montgomery's philosophy allowed organized withdrawal, preserved enemy forces, extended the campaign. The choice between these approaches was made based on command hierarchy and diplomatic considerations, not military effectiveness. Eisenhower sided with Montgomery to preserve Allied unity, accepting incomplete victory to avoid command crisis. This decision was politically astute and strategically costly. The Falaise pocket demonstrated that coalition warfare's political requirements sometimes override military logic, that preserving command relationships matters more than optimizing tactical outcomes. Whether this prioritization serves national interests remains one of war's permanent questions. Knutsford, Wales, September 5th, in 1944. George Patton enters a small civic hall for what should be a routine ceremonial appearance. The local community has organized a welcome for American forces stationed nearby. Patton has been invited as celebrity guest, expected to make brief remarks thanking British hosts for supporting Allied operations. The audience consists of approximately 70 people, local officials, civic leaders, a handful of journalists covering the event as human interest story. Patton's prepared remarks are appropriately brief and diplomatic, thanking the community for its hospitality, praising Anglo-American cooperation, expressing confidence in eventual Allied victory. Then, responding to a question about post-war arrangements, Patton extemporizes. He remarks casually that Americans and British will naturally govern the world after this war is over, explaining that defeating the Axis will make American and British cooperation the foundation of post-war international order. The comment seems innocuous in context, an obvious observation that the victorious powers will shape post-war arrangements. But press representatives attending the event seize on the phrasing. Within hours, the story breaks in London and American newspapers. The context disappears. Patton's diplomatic observation becomes international scandal. September 6, 1944. The story explodes across morning newspapers with headlines that distort Patton's comment beyond recognition. Patton predicts Anglo-American world rule, declares the New York Times. General claims U.S. And Britain will govern world, reports the Washington Post. Editorial pages immediately demand his removal, citing the comment as evidence of dangerous political ambition, inappropriate military interference in diplomatic matters, and concerning megalomania. Columnists note that Patton has no authority to discuss post-war arrangements, that his comment suggests he views himself as political figure rather than military officer, that his history of controversial statements demonstrates poor judgment. The criticism would be devastating for any general. For Patton, with the slapping scandal still recent memory, the criticism becomes existential threat. Congressional representatives who defended him after the slapping incident now distance themselves. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge Jr., who had previously supported keeping Patton in command despite controversy, now questions whether Patton's value outweighs his political liabilities. The incident is transforming from minor gaffe into career-ending crisis. The actual quote from Patton's Knutsford speech reveals how completely context was lost in media coverage. Britain and America are going to have to run the world. The only way to do that is to have a sort of union between the British and ourselves. Patton was clearly discussing post-war cooperation between allied democracies, not suggesting literal imperial governance or military dictatorship. The civic group had specifically been discussing challenges of post-war reconstruction and international organization. Patton's comment addressed those concerns, suggesting that American and British cooperation would be essential for maintaining peace after defeating fascism. But nuance disappeared in newspaper coverage. The carefully chosen phrase, "have to run the world," became, "will govern the world," in headlines. The conditional suggestion, "going to have to," became confident prediction, predicts, or claims. The distortion was not accidental, but deliberate editorial choice that transformed diplomatic observation into authoritarian declaration. The political response reveals how the slapping scandal had permanently damaged Patton's reputation. Congressman John Dingell of Michigan demands Patton's immediate dismissal, and arguing that a general who assaults wounded soldiers and claims the right to govern the world has no place in American military command. This linkage between unrelated incidents demonstrates how the slapping scandal has become a permanent weapon against Patton. Any subsequent mistake, controversy, or perceived error can now be connected back to the slapping incident as evidence of pattern. Senator Lodge reignites the slapping scandal explicitly, arguing that Patton's Knutsford comment demonstrates the same poor judgment and arrogant disregard for propriety that caused him to assault hospitalized soldiers. The logic is tenuous but politically effective. Patton is being defined not by his military achievements, but by his worst moments, his tactical brilliance overshadowed by personal controversies. September 7th, 1944. Eisenhower orders Patton to write formal explanation of his Knutsford remarks and to prepare for possible relief from command. The order is devastating. Eisenhower is not requesting clarification or accepting Patton's explanation. He is preparing to remove Patton from Third Army command, at the moment when Third Army is achieving spectacular operational results. Patton's response shows fury at being misquoted and recognition of his vulnerability. He writes detailed explanation emphasizing context, noting that he was responding to specific question about post-war cooperation, pointing out that media coverage deliberately distorted his meaning, but he also understands that explanation will not save him. Political pressure for his removal is building rapidly. And Secretary of War Henry Stimson has received telegrams from congressional leaders demanding action. Eisenhower cannot ignore this pressure indefinitely. Patton's career survival now depends on whether Eisenhower considers him militarily indispensable despite political liabilities. September 8, 1944. The meeting between Eisenhower and Patton determines Patton's immediate fate. Eisenhower is furious but also calculating. He tells Patton bluntly, "You've got about 72 hours to prove yourself indispensable or I remove you." The phrasing reveals Eisenhower's dilemma. He personally wants to remove Patton, wants to be free of constant political crises and diplomatic incidents. But he also recognizes that Third Army is delivering the most aggressive and effective operations in the European theater. That removing Patton might slow Allied advance measurably. Eisenhower is giving Patton conditional survival, deliver overwhelming military success immediately, or accept relief. This ultimatum places impossible burden on Patton. He must execute major offensive operations, achieve decisive victories, demonstrate absolute indispensability, all within 72 hours while managing the psychological pressure of knowing his career hangs in balance. The requirements are contradictory. Major offensive operations require weeks of preparation. Eisenhower is demanding proof of indispensability immediately. Eisenhower's September 7th diary entry reveals his internal conflict. "I can't keep Patton. He's too valuable. But I also can't keep him. This time, it's political. Oh, I'm not sure I can shield him." This statement captures the impossible position Eisenhower faces. Patton delivers military results that no other American commander matches. His aggressive operations are achieving breakthrough that methodical commanders cannot produce. But his political liabilities are becoming intolerable. Every controversial statement creates crisis that requires Eisenhower's personal intervention, diverts attention from military operations, threatens Allied unity. Eisenhower is admitting that military value and political cost are approaching equilibrium, that one more major incident will tip the balance toward removal. Patton survives the Knutsford incident not because he deserves to, but because the alternative is worse. Removing him would slow Third Army's advance, demoralize aggressive commanders throughout the Army. A suggests that political controversy matters more than military effectiveness. Eisenhower chooses to keep Patton, but with explicit warning that survival is temporary. The media distortion that transformed Patton's diplomatic observation into authoritarian declaration reveals broader patterns in wartime journalism. Newspapers in 1944 operate under voluntary censorship that restricts military information but allows political criticism. This creates incentive structure where controversial statements by military officers become valuable content that can be published without restriction. Patton's comment about post-war cooperation was not military secret or operational information, so newspapers could report it freely. But reporting it accurately as diplomatic observation would have generated minimal public interest. Once distorting it into authoritarian claim created controversy that sold newspapers and generated public debate. The economic incentives of wartime journalism worked against accurate reporting and in favor of sensationalism. Patton was victim of these incentives, but also contributor to them through his pattern of controversial statements that made him perpetual target. The deeper question raised by the Knutsford incident is whether military genius excuses or requires tolerance of political indiscretion. Patton's defenders argue that exceptional military talent comes with personality traits that create political friction, that truly aggressive commanders inevitably challenge conventional thinking, that institutional tolerance of controversy is price of tactical excellence. His critics argue that military competence does not excuse poor judgment, that commanders must combine tactical skill with political awareness, that Patton's repeated indiscretions demonstrate fundamental character flaws that disqualify him from high command. Both positions are internally consistent. Neither is fully convincing. The historical record shows that Patton's tactical brilliance was genuine, and that his political liabilities were serious. Whether military organizations should tolerate the second to gain the first remains an unresolved question that extends beyond Patton's specific case to general principles of civil-military relations. The ultimate consequence of the Knutsford incident is that Patton's career permanently enters probationary status. He will continue commanding Third Army through autumn 1944. All will deliver spectacular operational victories, will prove his military value repeatedly, but he will never escape the shadow of political vulnerability. Every decision he makes will be evaluated not only for military merit, but for political risk. Every controversial statement will threaten immediate relief. Every aggressive operation will be assessed through lens of whether political cost outweighs military benefit. Patton has become hostage to his own reputation, trapped between the aggressive personality that makes him effective and the political constraints that threaten to end his career. The Knutsford incident did not remove Patton from command. It ensured that removal was inevitable, that the question was not whether his career would end badly, but when. Political forces had marked Patton for destruction. Only overwhelming military success could delay that destruction. Whether he could deliver sufficient success to survive until war's end remained uncertain. Meuse River, France. September 22, 1944. Third Army engineers construct pontoon bridges under sporadic German artillery fire, while Patton watches from a forward observation post. The Meuse represents a significant psychological barrier, a river that has defined French defensive strategy for centuries, a natural obstacle that conventional doctrine says should be approached cautiously and crossed methodically. Patton's forces reach the river and cross within 8 hours of arrival, giving German defenders no time to establish prepared positions on the far bank. This is aggressive warfare perfected, continuous movement that prevents enemy recovery, all operational tempo that substitutes for numerical superiority, calculated risk that achieves strategic objectives before enemy understands the threat. But Patton is not crossing the Meuse to prove tactical theories. He is crossing because his career depends on demonstrating indispensability so absolute that political liability becomes irrelevant. The Knutsford incident has placed him on probation. Eisenhower has made clear that one more scandal will end his career. Patton's response is to execute the most sustained and successful offensive campaign in American military history, to prove through sheer operational brilliance that removing him is strategically impossible. The offensive from September 22nd through October 12th represents 21 days of continuous operations that redefine possible tempo in mechanized warfare. Third Army advances 210 miles against German defensive lines that are professionally constructed and stubbornly defended. Patton's forces capture Nancy, drive toward the Moselle River, engage and defeat German counterattacks, maintain forward momentum even when fuel supplies drop to critical levels. The advance averages 10 miles per day, a rate that exceeds planning assumptions by 300%. But this achievement comes at human cost. Soldiers advance all day, consolidate positions at night with minimal rest, advance again the next morning. Equipment breaks down from continuous operation. Supply lines stretch to breaking point. Casualties mount steadily as tired soldiers make mistakes and German defenders exploit any tactical error. Yet Third Army continues advancing because Patton drives his commanders relentlessly, relieves officers who suggest caution, personally visits frontline units to maintain aggressive spirit. He is fighting two wars simultaneously: the official war against German forces and the private war to prove his indispensability to Eisenhower. October the 3rd, 1944, Moselle River. Third Army reaches another major water barrier, this one more formidable than the Meuse. The Moselle flows through steep valleys, its banks dominated by high ground that provides German defenders with excellent observation and fields of fire. German forces attempt major counterattack near Amiens, concentrating 2 divisions for coordinated assault designed to push Third Army back across the river and establish stable defensive line. The attack is well planned and aggressively executed, the kind of German tactical competence that has made Wehrmacht so formidable throughout the war. But Patton's forces are prepared. His intelligence officers have predicted the counterattack location through analysis of German radio traffic and defensive preparations. His armor is positioned to receive the attack and counterattack immediately through the flanks. Within 48 hours, the German counterattack has collapsed completely. 2 German divisions have been effectively destroyed, their survivors retreating in disorder, their equipment abandoned or captured. Patton has not merely defended against German attack, but transformed defensive battle into offensive victory, creating local encirclements that eliminate enemy divisions entirely. The Metz campaign from November 8th through December 15th represents the most sustained urban combat Third Army has faced. Metz is ancient fortress city, surrounded by 43 separate forts and fortifications built over centuries to defend this strategic position. Previous wars have demonstrated that reducing Metz requires months of siege operations and produces horrific casualties. French armies in 1870 besieged Metz for 2 months before forcing surrender. German armies in World War I bypassed Metz entirely rather than assault it directly. Conventional wisdom says Metz should be contained and bypassed, leaving its garrison isolated while main forces advance past it. Patton decides to capture Metz through aggressive encirclement rather than direct assault or patient siege. His forces attack from north and south simultaneously, bypassing the strongest fortifications, cutting supply lines, creating multiple local crises that prevent coordinated German defense. The approach is brilliant improvisation that combines aggressive maneuver with just enough direct assault to keep defenders focused on immediate threats rather than organized withdrawal. Within 46 days, Metz falls. The fortress that has resisted capture for centuries is reduced in weeks through aggressive operational art that conventional doctrine said was impossible. The casualty achievement from September through December validates Patton's aggressive philosophy, while raising questions about its true costs. Third Army inflicts more than 600,000 German casualties during this period, killed, wounded, captured. These losses devastate German defensive capabilities, eliminate entire divisions from Wehrmacht order of battle, force continuous retreat that prevents establishing stable defensive lines. But Third Army also suffers 120,000 American casualties during the same period, losses that are substantial in absolute terms, but favorable in relative comparison. The casualty ratio of approximately 2.5 to 1 favoring Allies demonstrates that Patton's aggressive tactics are achieving decisive results without producing disproportionate American losses. But this statistical success obscures individual tragedies. 120,000 casualties means 120,000 families receiving telegrams, 120,000 soldiers killed or wounded or captured, all 120,000 individual catastrophes that statistics reduce to numbers. Patton is winning decisively, but winning is measured in blood. The supply miracle enabling Third Army's sustained operations reveals both logistical achievement and institutional strain. Third Army requires 450,000 gallons of fuel daily to maintain its operational tempo. This is staggering consumption that exceeds all planning assumptions. SHAF logistical staff achieves average delivery of 380,000 gallons per day through extraordinary efforts, requisitioning trucks from other armies, prioritizing Third Army fuel convoys over other supplies, rationing other armies' allocations to concentrate resources where they will produce maximum results. But this concentration creates strategic distortion. All other American armies receive less fuel than planned, slowing their advances, preventing coordinated operations across entire front. The decision to prioritize Patton's operations over theater-wide coordination represents vindication of his aggressive philosophy. Eisenhower and his staff are effectively choosing breakthrough over broad front, accepting that Patton's concentrated success matters more than even distribution. This is exactly what Patton has advocated since North Africa, but it is also creating the operational conditions Eisenhower's doctrine was designed to prevent: unbalanced advance, vulnerable flanks, logistics stretched beyond sustainable capacity. December the 16th, 1944, 6 o'clock in the morning, German forces launched the Ardennes offensive, on a desperate strategic counterattack designed to split Allied armies, recapture the port of Antwerp, force negotiated settlement before Germany's complete collapse. The attack achieves complete tactical surprise, crashes through thinly held American defensive positions, creates bulge in Allied lines that threatens catastrophic breakthrough. Hitler has concentrated his last mobile reserves for this offensive, gambling everything on achieving decisive success before Allied numerical superiority becomes overwhelming. The attack is brilliant gamble and desperate mistake simultaneously. If it succeeds, Germany might force negotiated peace. If it fails, Germany will have exhausted its last strategic reserves. Within hours of the attack's beginning, Eisenhower summons his senior commanders to emergency conference. The situation is critical. All German forces are advancing rapidly. American units are surrounded. The entire Allied campaign is suddenly in jeopardy. Eisenhower needs immediate response, and he needs it from his most aggressive commander. Patton's response becomes legendary in military history. Third Army is positioned south of the German breakthrough, advancing east toward the Rhine. Conventional military wisdom says that disengaging from active offensive operations, wheeling an entire army 90 degrees, and attacking in completely different direction requires weeks of planning and preparation. Patton tells Eisenhower he can disengage Third Army and attack north toward Bastogne within 48 hours. The claim seems impossible. Third Army consists of approximately 250,000 soldiers, thousands of vehicles, hundreds of artillery pieces, extensive logistics networks. Turning this entire force 90 degrees while maintaining combat effectiveness requires coordination that standard doctrine says cannot be achieved in less than 2 weeks. But Patton has already prepared contingency plans for exactly this situation. His staff has developed detailed movement schedules. His commanders understand their new objectives. His logistics officers have pre-positioned fuel and ammunition. Within 48 hours, Third Army completes its wheel and begins attacking north toward the surrounded American forces at Bastogne. December 26, 1944, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Third Army's forward elements reach Bastogne, relieving the trapped 101st Airborne Division and breaking the German encirclement. And the tactical pivot is hailed internationally as one of the war's greatest maneuvers, proof that aggressive training and preparation enable operational flexibility that cautious doctrine considers impossible. Eisenhower personally telegrams Patton, "Your prompt action in shifting Third Army to the north and your subsequent aggressive operations have been in the highest traditions of American generalship." This praise is significant beyond its diplomatic phrasing. Eisenhower is acknowledging that Patton's aggressive philosophy, the approach that has created constant friction throughout the campaign, has delivered decisive results when conventional doctrine would have failed. The Ardennes response represents vindication of everything Patton has advocated. Aggressive training creates capable forces. Prepared contingency planning enables rapid response. Operational flexibility matters more than systematic preparation. Patton is being proven correct at precisely the moment when his career seemed most vulnerable to political destruction. The deeper significance of Patton's Ardennes response is that it demonstrates what aggressive warfare enables under extreme conditions. Third Army's ability to disengage from offensive operations, wheel 90 degrees, and immediately attack in new direction was not improvisation, but prepared capability. Patton had spent years training his forces to operate aggressively under uncertainty, to maintain combat effectiveness during rapid maneuver, to execute complex operations without extensive preparation time. This training philosophy was expensive in peacetime, demanding in practice, and unpopular with soldiers who preferred predictable routines. But it produced forces capable of achieving what Eisenhower's methodical doctrine considered impossible. The Ardennes response proved that Patton's entire approach to warfare, the philosophy that had created constant institutional friction, delivered decisive results when tested by genuine crisis. The question was whether this vindication would protect him politically, or whether his accumulated controversies would still destroy his career despite military success. Patton's personal response to the Ardennes operation reveals his understanding of career dynamics. He knows the tactical pivot has proven his value decisively. He knows Eisenhower cannot remove him now without appearing to punish success. But he also knows that political forces hostile to him have not disappeared, and that the Knutsford incident and slapping scandal remain permanent weapons his critics can use. His diary entries from late December express satisfaction mixed with wariness. "I have proven what aggressive warfare can achieve, but they will find ways to punish me for being right. They always do." This assessment is both paranoid and accurate. Patton has indeed proven his military value beyond question, but he has also accumulated political enemies who will continue seeking opportunities to remove him from command. His vindication is tactical, not political. Military success has bought him temporary survival, but not permanent security. The ultimate question raised by Patton's autumn campaign is whether he finally proved that aggressive warfare wins wars faster and more decisively than methodical approaches. The statistical evidence is compelling. Third Army advanced faster, inflicted higher casualties, achieved more decisive results than other American armies during the same period. The casualty ratios favored Allies decisively. The operational tempo prevented German recovery and reorganization. The Ardennes response demonstrated capabilities that cautious doctrine considered impossible. All evidence suggests Patton's philosophy was strategically superior, but this conclusion is complicated by the question of sustainability. Third Army's operations required fuel consumption that could only be sustained by reducing other armies' allocations. The aggressive tempo produced higher equipment breakdown rates and required constant replacement of exhausted soldiers. The operational achievements were genuine, but they came at costs that might not have been sustainable if the war had lasted longer, or if Allied material superiority had been less overwhelming. Patton was right that aggressive warfare works brilliantly when exploiting material advantage. Whether it would work without that advantage remains unanswered question. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. January 1945. Eisenhower commissions formal study on campaign efficiency, directing his operations analysis staff to compare Third Army's results against other American Army groups using quantitative metrics. The study is classified, intended for internal assessment rather than public consumption, which means its conclusions can be brutally honest without diplomatic constraints. The analysts examine advance rates, casualty ratios, fuel consumption per mile advanced, territory captured per division committed, enemy casualties inflicted per American casualty suffered. They compare Patton's 3rd Army against Bradley's 12th Army group average, against Hodge's 1st Army specifically, against Devers' 6th Army group operations in southern France. The quantitative analysis is comprehensive and devastating. 3rd Army achieved average daily advance of 6.8 miles during active operations. Montgomery's forces averaged 2.1 miles daily. Patton's casualty rate among engaged forces was 12.4%. The theater average was 18.7%. Every metric examined shows 3rd Army delivering superior results. The study confirms what battlefield commanders already know, but institutional doctrine refuses to acknowledge. Aggressive warfare works. The comparative statistics reveal the scale of Patton's tactical achievement. His armies advanced more than 3 times faster than other Allied formations, while suffering approximately 33% fewer casualties per engaged soldier. These are not marginal improvements, but transformational differences that suggest fundamentally superior operational methods. But the study also reveals costs that aggregate statistics obscure. Patton's aggressive maneuver required 18% more fuel per kilometer advanced than methodical approaches used. His forces experienced higher equipment breakdown rates, approximately 27% above theater average, i.e. from continuous operations that gave minimal maintenance time. His logistics networks operated constantly above planned capacity, requiring improvisation and calculated risk that sometimes left units temporarily without ammunition or fuel. The aggressive approach produced superior results, but required accepting risks that cautious commanders considered unacceptable. The question was whether those risks were genuinely acceptable or simply fortunate not to have produced catastrophe. Post-war interview, 1953. General Omar Bradley, interviewed for Official Army History Project, reflects on Patton's methods with 7 years of hindsight. Patton was right about tempo. He broke through where we were grinding, but he was also reckless, and he got lucky. This assessment captures the ambivalence that senior commanders felt about Patton's success. Bradley acknowledges that Patton's aggressive approach produced breakthrough, where methodical doctrine produced stalemate. But he also suggests that success depended partially on fortune rather than entirely on skill, that calculated risks could easily have become catastrophic failures if circumstances had been slightly different. Bradley's assessment is self-serving, but not entirely wrong. Patton did take risks that could have produced disasters. German counterattacks against overextended American positions could have isolated forward units and destroyed them before reinforcements arrived. Fuel shortages could have left armor immobilized and vulnerable. And equipment breakdowns could have rendered formations combat ineffective at critical moments. None of these potential disasters occurred, which allowed Patton's aggressive operations to succeed brilliantly. But their potential existence suggests that success was not entirely inevitable. Fort Leavenworth, a military science course, 1955. Army officers studying operational art examined Patton's campaigns as models of aggressive movement warfare. His tactics have been formally incorporated into Army doctrine, his methods taught as standard approach to breakthrough operations, his philosophy vindicated by institutional endorsement. The irony is profound. During the war, Patton was treated as problematic exception, who required constant supervision to prevent reckless operations. 10 years later, his methods are being taught as optimal doctrine that all commanders should emulate. This transformation suggests that institutional wisdom during wartime was wrong, that caution was overcautious, that Patton's aggressive approach should have been standard rather than exceptional. But the transformation also reflects changed circumstances. In 1955, the Army is studying how to fight Soviet forces in potential World War III, conflict where rapid breakthrough and aggressive pursuit would be essential against numerically superior enemy. Patton's methods suit this strategic requirement better than methodical approaches designed for coalition warfare with material superiority. The doctrine is being adopted not because it was proven optimal in World War II, but because it seems appropriate for potential future conflicts. Among the most striking vindication of Patton's approach comes from unexpected source. Declassified Soviet military analysis from the 1960s reveals that Russian theorists studied Patton's operations extensively as examples of what they called deep battle doctrine. Soviet military thinking emphasized breakthrough operations, rapid exploitation, unrelenting offensive pressure that prevents enemy recovery. These principles are identical to Patton's philosophy. Russian analysis noted that American Army stumbled onto superior operational maneuver through aggressive commander who operated outside institutional constraints. This assessment suggests that Patton independently developed tactical approaches that Soviet military doctrine had formalized through systematic study. Many of the Russians recognized what American commanders had resisted, that aggressive warfare focusing on tempo and exploitation was superior to methodical approaches focusing on consolidation and coordination. Soviet vindication of Patton's methods is particularly significant because Russian military doctrine proved highly effective in World War II and shaped global military thinking for decades afterward. The supply argument that was used against Patton during the war appears different when analyzed quantitatively. Patton's aggressive maneuver required 18% more fuel per kilometer advanced than methodical approaches, but his operations achieved territorial gains 220% faster. This means the fuel-to-result ratio was actually 94% more efficient despite higher consumption per mile. Patton was using more fuel but achieving much more with it, making his approach more efficient by relevant metric, despite appearing wasteful by conventional measurement. This analysis reveals how institutional assumptions about efficiency can be wrong. Standard doctrine measured efficiency by consumption rates. Armies that used less fuel per mile were considered more efficient. But actual efficiency should be measured by strategic results per resource consumed. By that standard, Patton's apparently wasteful approach was dramatically more efficient than alternatives. The institutional resistance to his methods was based on measuring wrong variables. Post-war German analysis provides external validation of Patton's effectiveness. At a captured Wehrmacht, general staff studies indicate that rapid American advances created operational disruption that prevented coherent defensive strategy. German commanders consistently reported that Patton's tempo made defensive planning impossible because situation changed faster than plans could be developed and executed. German defensive doctrine relied on establishing prepared positions, concentrating mobile reserves, coordinating counterattacks. All these capabilities required time. Patton's operational tempo denied that time, keeping German forces constantly reacting rather than planning, constantly retreating rather than defending. The German analysis noted that methodical Allied advances, while more difficult to defeat tactically, were predictable strategically, allowing German forces to organize defensive lines and conduct skilled delaying actions. Patton's unpredictable aggression created chaos that German professionalism could not overcome. This is precisely the effect Patton had intended to create. His theory was that breaking enemy planning was more valuable than destroying enemy forces, that psychological disruption achieved through tempo was more decisive than material destruction achieved through firepower. The specific comparison between Sicily and Normandy operations reveals how approach affected outcomes. In Sicily, Patton's rapid maneuver prevented organized German delaying action. Wehrmacht forces attempted to establish defensive lines, but found themselves constantly outflanked before positions could be properly fortified. The result was relatively rapid campaign with limited German success in delaying Allied advance. In Normandy, methodical approach allowed Germans to establish prepared defensive positions in Bocage country, conduct skilled delaying actions that inflicted heavy casualties, organize coherent withdrawals that preserved combat capability. The contrast suggests that Patton's aggressive approach prevented enemy from using defensive advantages that methodical approach allowed them to exploit. The question was whether this was generalizable principle or specific to particular circumstances. Did aggressive warfare always prevent effective defense, or did it only work when material superiority and favorable terrain made rapid advance possible? Official U.S. Army Historical Report. 1950. The formal assessment provides careful judgment. While General Patton's operational tempo occasionally created tactical vulnerabilities, the strategic effects of rapid movement generated disproportionate German response, essentially shattering enemy cohesion rather than merely defeating enemy forces. This phrasing is diplomatically chosen, but strategically significant. The report acknowledges that Patton's methods created risks, but argues those risks were justified by strategic benefits. More importantly, the report introduces concept of shattering enemy forces as distinct from defeating them. Traditional military doctrine focuses on destruction, killing enemy soldiers, destroying enemy equipment, capturing enemy territory. Patton's approach focused on disruption, breaking enemy planning, preventing recovery, and creating psychological collapse that makes organized resistance impossible. The distinction is profound. Destruction requires superior firepower and accepts extended campaigns. Disruption requires superior tempo and produces rapid conclusions. The historical report is validating Patton's fundamental theory, while carefully avoiding explicit criticism of Eisenhower's contrary approach. The ultimate question is why Patton was treated as problem rather than asset if his methods were strategically superior. The answer involves institutional conservatism that transcends rational analysis. Military organizations value predictability and control more than they value exceptional results. Patton's aggressive approach produced superior outcomes but required accepting uncertainty, tolerating risk, and trusting subordinate commanders to make good decisions without detailed guidance. These requirements violated institutional preferences for careful planning, coordinated operations, centralized control. Eisenhower's methodical doctrine was inferior tactically, but superior institutionally because it maintained command structure, preserved Allied unity, ensured all operations proceeded according to theater plan. The American Army chose institutional coherence over tactical excellence, accepting slower operations in exchange for manageable command relationships. This choice was rational from organizational perspective, even if suboptimal from military perspective. The tragedy was that the choice was never explicitly made or acknowledged. Instead, Patton was treated as problematic individual requiring supervision rather than as exemplar of superior approach requiring adoption. The final assessment requires acknowledging what cannot be known. Patton's aggressive warfare worked brilliantly in World War II context, material superiority, air supremacy, enemy fighting, two-front war. Eventual collapse inevitable regardless of tactics employed. Whether his approach would work against equal opponents or, in less favorable circumstances, remains unanswerable. His methods required resources, mobility, communications, all advantages American forces possessed throughout European campaign. Whether aggressive warfare is universally superior or situationally effective depends on questions the historical record cannot resolve. What can be said with confidence is that Patton's approach was superior to alternatives employed during World War II, that his methods should have been adopted more broadly, that institutional resistance to his philosophy cost Allied lives and extended the campaign. Whether military organizations learned the right lessons from Patton's success remains questionable even 70 years later. 3rd Army Headquarters, Nancy, France. December 1944. George Patton sits alone in his quarters past midnight, writing in his personal diary by lamplight. The entry reveals thoughts he would never express publicly, emotions he conceals beneath aggressive exterior, doubts that contradict his confident persona. "Goddamn the small minds who cannot see that aggressive war is the shortest war," he writes. "I do what I believe is right and they punish me for it. Every victory brings another crisis. Every success brings another constraint. They want me to win battles but not to fight wars." The words are bitter, exhausted, revealing. This is not the confident general whose public speeches inspire soldiers and intimidate enemies. This is a man psychologically ground down by constant conflict with superiors, worn out by fighting 2 wars simultaneously, damaged by institutional resistance that makes every achievement feel like defeat. Patton has won every battle he has fought in 1944, but he has lost the larger war against institutional caution, against political constraints, against commanders who value coordination over results. The invisible wound is not physical injury, but psychological exhaustion from being right in an organization that punishes correctness. The pattern becomes clear when examining Patton's private correspondence chronologically. His letters to his wife Beatrice show escalating frustration from July 1944 onward. In early letters, he expresses confidence that his tactical successes will overcome political obstacles. By September, after the Knutsford incident, his tone darkens significantly. "They don't want a soldier," he writes. "They want a politician in uniform. If I were less brilliant, I would be left alone." This statement reveals Patton's understanding of his dilemma. His exceptional tactical ability makes him simultaneously invaluable and intolerable. If he were merely competent, he could follow doctrine comfortably and build conventional career. But his brilliance creates expectations he must continuously exceed, produces results that threaten institutional stability, generates jealousy and resentment among peers. By December, his letters reveal something approaching despair. "I have proven everything I claimed. I have delivered everything they demanded, and still they treat me as problem to be managed rather than asset to be employed." November 19th, 44. Private conversation between Eisenhower and Patton. The exchange, recorded by Eisenhower's aide and preserved in classified files, reveals the complete breakdown of their professional relationship. Eisenhower tells Patton directly, "George, you're my best general, but you're also my biggest problem. You've got to learn that war is politics." Patton's response is immediate and harsh. "War should not be politics. Politics lost us the chance to beat the Russians, and God knows we'll pay for that before this is over." This exchange captures their fundamental disagreement. Eisenhower believes military operations must serve political objectives, that commanders must accept political constraints on tactical decisions, that winning wars requires managing alliances and diplomatic relationships. Patton believes military operations should be judged by military results, that political considerations should not override tactical effectiveness, that commanders should be given objectives and trusted to achieve them through whatever methods work best. Both positions are philosophically coherent. Both have historical precedent. But they are incompatible within single command structure. Eisenhower must manage coalition politics. Patton must deliver battlefield victories. Their conflicting requirements create perpetual friction. The psychological toll manifests physically in ways Army medical records document but never act upon. Medical report from February 1945 notes in Patton's file, "General displays signs of stress-induced hypervigilance and insomnia. Recommend reduction in operational demands. Patient refuses. The medical assessment is clinically accurate and institutionally useless. Reducing operational demands would mean relieving Patton from command, exactly what political enemies want. Accepting medical recommendations would validate criticism that he is psychologically unstable. Patton refuses treatment because accepting it would end his career, so he continues functioning with 4 hours of sleep per night, manages chronic stress through force of will, conceals psychological distress beneath aggressive confidence." His aide, Captain Richard Nixon, notes in personal diary that Patton's sleep pattern is frequently interrupted by anxiety about tactical decisions, that he often wakes at 3 a.m. and spends remaining night hours studying maps and reviewing operational plans. This behavior is not professional dedication, but psychological disorder, inability to stop thinking about problems, hypervigilance that prevents rest. The isolation deepens because Patton has no peer confidants with whom he can share doubts and frustrations. Yes, Omar Bradley was once friend and subordinate, but is now superior positioned between Patton and Eisenhower, serving as buffer and supervisor. Montgomery is hated rival, whose methodical doctrine represents everything Patton opposes. Devers commands separate army group, with whom Patton has minimal contact. Patton cannot confide in subordinates because commanders must project confidence to maintain unit morale. He cannot confide in superiors because they already doubt his judgment. He cannot confide in peers because they are competitors or enemies. The only person he trusts completely is his wife Beatrice, hundreds of miles away in the United States, unreachable except through letters that take weeks to deliver and receive. This isolation is psychologically destructive. Patton processes enormous operational stress that manages hundreds of thousands of soldiers' lives, makes decisions that determine campaign outcomes, all while unable to discuss his doubts or fears with anyone who could provide genuine support or understanding. The anxiety manifests as aggression in ways subordinates notice but cannot address. Officers note that, in the days following Eisenhower overruling his tactical recommendations, Patton's temperament becomes notably sharper and more explosive. He relieves commanders more readily, criticizes subordinates more harshly, demands impossible results with threatening intensity. This aggression is not leadership, but displaced rage, fury at Eisenhower redirected towards safer targets who cannot defend themselves. The pattern is psychologically predictable and morally reprehensible. Yet Patton is punishing subordinates for frustrations created by superiors, creating toxic command climate because he cannot express anger toward people actually responsible for his stress. His tactical brilliance does not excuse this behavior. His psychological distress does not justify it. But it helps explain how exceptional commander becomes increasingly difficult leader, how professional excellence coexists with personal cruelty, how military genius damages the people it should protect. The letter Patton writes to Secretary of War Stimson in August 1944, but never sends, reveals the depth of his bitterness. The document, discovered in his papers after his death, is remarkable for its angry honesty. I am being prevented from prosecution of war through fear of my personality. This is strategy by committee, and it is costing American lives. Every day we delay is another day the enemy uses to prepare defenses. Every constraint you place on aggressive commanders is another casualty we will suffer later. You have chosen political safety over military necessity. History will judge this choice harshly. The letter was never sent because Patton recognized that sending it would end his career immediately. But writing it served psychological purpose, allowed him to express rage that could not be spoken aloud, provided emotional release that private diary entries could not fully satisfy. The letter is also remarkable for being substantially correct. Institutional caution did extend the campaign beyond what aggressive prosecution might have achieved. Political constraints did override tactical opportunities. And strategy by committee did produce compromises that satisfied no one. Patton was right, but being right without power is psychologically devastating. The deeper question is how much of Patton's problem personality was inherent versus created by institutional pressure. His aggressive temperament predated the war, visible in his early career as competitive drive and impatience with mediocrity. But the volcanic rage, the public incidents, the barely controlled fury that characterized his wartime behavior seems qualitatively different from peacetime eccentricity. The evidence suggests that constant institutional resistance transformed aggressive personality into something more destructive. Every time Patton proved his methods worked, institutional doctrine rejected them. Every time he delivered victories, old political forces tried to remove him. Every time he demonstrated superior results, he was criticized for not following established procedures. This pattern would damage anyone psychologically. For someone with Patton's personality, someone who defined himself through military excellence and tactical validation, the damage was catastrophic. He was trapped in an organization that simultaneously needed his talents and rejected his methods, that celebrated his victories while punishing his approaches, that made him indispensable while treating him as intolerable. The photograph from May 1945, taken at war's end, shows Patton's face bearing visible signs of psychological exhaustion. He looks decades older than his 59 years. His expression combines triumph and bitterness, victory and isolation, vindication and defeat. He has achieved everything he claimed he could achieve. His armies have advanced faster, fought more effectively, delivered more decisive victories than any other American formation. His tactical theories have been proven correct. His aggressive philosophy has produced superior results. But this success has not brought the satisfaction or recognition he craved. Instead, he remains politically vulnerable, institutionally isolated, personally damaged by years of fighting against his own command structure. The psychological cost of being right in an organization determined to constrain him has been devastating. Patton won every battle except the one that mattered most, the battle to be understood, accepted, trusted by the institution he served. The ultimate tragedy of Patton's psychological wound is that it was unnecessary. What if Eisenhower had fully supported aggressive operations instead of constantly constraining them? If institutional doctrine had embraced breakthrough warfare instead of resisting it? If political forces had protected tactical excellence instead of threatening it? Patton could have achieved his operational results without suffering psychological damage. The institutional barriers that broke him psychologically were not inevitable requirements of military organization, but choices made by leaders who valued predictability over excellence. Those choices won the war, but damaged the commander who delivered the victories. Whether that price was worth paying remains one of war's unanswerable moral questions. Patton gave everything to his nation's military service: his talent, his energy, his health, his psychological well-being. In return, he received victories that were not fully celebrated, vindication that came too late, recognition that was always conditional on next success. The invisible wound was not battlefield trauma, but institutional betrayal, slow psychological destruction of genius by organization, too rigid to accommodate excellence. Regensburg, Germany, May 5, 1945. Third Army crosses into Bavaria, the heartland of Nazi ideology, now reduced to rubble and desperation. George Patton stands in his command jeep, watching columns of German prisoners trudge past, thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers surrendering without resistance. The war in Europe is effectively over. German forces are collapsing everywhere. Hitler is dead by suicide in his Berlin bunker. The 1,000-year Reich has lasted 12 years and ended in total defeat. Yet Patton should feel triumphant. He has led armies across France and Germany, delivered victories that vindicated everything he advocated, proven his tactical theories beyond question. But as he watches the defeated German soldiers, his expression shows no satisfaction, only grim calculation. He is already fighting the next war in his mind, already recognizing that defeating Germany creates a new strategic problem: Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. His comment to his staff becomes infamous: "We may have been fighting the wrong enemy all along." The statement is politically dangerous, ideologically troubling, strategically prescient. It captures Patton's growing conviction that destroying Nazi Germany while strengthening Soviet Russia represents flawed strategic outcome, that American forces should have prioritized containing communism over punishing fascism. May 7th and 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally at Reims, France, ending the European war officially. Eisenhower organizes formal surrender ceremonies where senior Allied commanders will sign as witnesses, legitimizing the victory and establishing occupation authority. Patton expects to be assigned prominent role. He commanded Third Army through more territory than any other American formation, delivered more aggressive operations, achieved more decisive results. But Eisenhower deliberately assigns him subordinate position, declining to give him visible prominence in surrender proceedings. The decision is calculated slight. Eisenhower's way of establishing that military victory does not override political considerations, that Patton's tactical excellence does not entitle him to diplomatic recognition. Patton understands the message immediately. He has won the battles, but lost the political war. His victories will be recorded in history, but credit will flow to commanders who managed coalitions and diplomatic relationships, rather than to the general who delivered operational results. The anti-Soviet rhetoric begins almost immediately. Bad Tölz, Germany, May 12, 1945. Patton tells assembled staff officers that, "We've beaten the wrong enemy. The Russians are the real threat now, and we should have dealt with them while we had the chance." This statement represents dangerous departure from official policy. The United States and Soviet Union are still formally allied, still coordinating occupation policies, still maintaining diplomatic cooperation. Patton is advocating for immediate strategic reorientation, suggesting American forces should prepare to fight their recent ally, implying that defeating Germany while leaving Soviet Union intact represents strategic failure. The assessment is not wrong strategically. Soviet domination of Eastern Europe will create Cold War tensions that define international relations for next 45 years. But Patton's blunt statement undermines official policy, creates diplomatic complications, suggests to suspicious Soviets that American military leadership is already planning aggression. Multiple witnesses record the statement, ensuring it reaches Eisenhower's headquarters within hours. Eisenhower's response is immediate and harsh. He issues official reprimand for making political statements unbecoming an officer, orders Patton to cease all discussion of post-war Soviet relations, warns him explicitly that continued political commentary will result in relief from command. The reprimand makes clear that Patton's military utility may have ended with German surrender, that his value as aggressive field commander does not extend to post-war strategic planning, that his political liabilities now outweigh tactical talents. Patton receives this message with barely concealed fury. He has just delivered the most successful American offensive campaign in military history. His armies have advanced 600 miles in 10 months, defeated German forces at every engagement, a demonstrated operational art that will be studied for generations, and his reward is official reprimand for expressing strategic assessment that will prove entirely correct within 3 years. The institutional ingratitude is devastating. July 1945. Berlin Victory Parade. The Allied powers organize massive military ceremonies celebrating victory, showcasing military might, establishing occupation authority. American, British, French, and Soviet forces parade through conquered capital. This should be Patton's moment of ultimate recognition, visible validation of his contribution to Allied victory. Instead, he is deliberately marginalized. Montgomery receives prominent position leading British forces. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov commands Soviet contingent with maximum visibility. French General Philippe Leclerc represents French forces ceremonially. American representation is divided among multiple commanders, none given singular prominence. Patton participates but is not featured, present but not celebrated. Photographs from the parade show his visible frustration, his face revealing bitterness at being denied recognition he believes he deserves. The marginalization is deliberate. Eisenhower and his staff are establishing narrative where victory results from Allied cooperation and systematic planning, rather than from aggressive operations by a controversial commander. The military achievement summary provides quantitative measure of Patton's contribution. Third Army advanced more than 600 miles in 281 days of combat operations, from Normandy beaches to Czechoslovakia's border. His forces inflicted 1,811,388 German casualties, killed, wounded, captured. Third Army suffered 168,000 American casualties during same period. The final casualty ratio was 10.7 to 1, favoring Allied forces, the most favorable ratio achieved by any American army during the European campaign. These statistics represent military excellence that should guarantee Patton's historical reputation and secure his post-war career. But statistics alone do not determine institutional standing. Patton's tactical brilliance is undeniable. His political liabilities are equally undeniable. Eisenhower must choose which matters more for post-war military organization. Eisenhower's post-war positioning reveals his strategic choice, that he immediately distances himself from Patton's aggressive philosophy, publicly emphasizing measured approach to occupation and emerging Cold War strategy. The approach Patton opposed during the war becomes official doctrine for peace. Eisenhower is preparing for political career, building public image as careful administrator and diplomatic coalition builder rather than aggressive warrior. Patton represents everything Eisenhower wants to distance himself from: controversial, politically unreliable, ideologically extreme. The more Eisenhower prepares for political future, the more Patton becomes liability rather than asset. Their relationship, strained throughout the war by tactical disagreements, now fractures completely over strategic vision. Eisenhower sees careful management of Soviet relations as essential to preventing World War III. Patton sees aggressive confrontation as necessary to prevent Soviet domination. Both positions are defensible. Neither can tolerate the other. The intelligence analysis from post-war German general staff interviews provides unexpected validation of Patton's reputation. Wehrmacht commanders, interrogated extensively about Allied operations, consistently identify Patton as the American general they feared and respected most. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt calls him the most dangerous general the Allies possessed. General Hans Guderian, architect of German armored doctrine, describes Patton as the only Allied commander who understood mobile warfare completely. These assessments come from professional military officers evaluating tactical excellence objectively, without political considerations. They confirm that Patton's reputation as aggressive commander was not merely American perception, but recognized reality among enemies who faced him. The German respect for Patton exceeds their assessment of Eisenhower, whom they considered capable administrator but not brilliant tactician. This distinction matters because it reveals what military professionals value: tactical excellence over political skill, operational art over diplomatic management. Eisenhower's personal letter to Patton from May 1945 represents his final attempt at professional reconciliation. Your operational achievement is the greatest in this war. Your political judgment is something else entirely. Let that be all on this subject. The phrasing is carefully diplomatic, but devastating in its implications. Eisenhower is acknowledging Patton's military brilliance while dismissing his strategic judgment completely. He is drawing absolute line between tactical operations, where Patton's excellence is undeniable, and strategic policy, where Patton's input is unwelcome. This division might seem reasonable, separating military execution from political planning, but it ignores that strategy and tactics are inseparable, that operational decisions have political consequences, that commanders who understand warfare deeply often see strategic realities that politicians and administrators miss. Eisenhower is telling Patton to remain in his tactical lane, to accept that political decisions belong to others, to recognize that military genius does not grant strategic authority. The deeper question raised by German surrender and its aftermath is whether Eisenhower deliberately kept Patton from prominent role in surrender ceremonies as political punishment. The evidence strongly suggests yes. Patton's operational contributions exceeded any other American field commander's achievements. His exclusion from central ceremonial role cannot be explained by military logic. It can only be explained as deliberate choice to minimize his visibility, to prevent him from claiming public credit that might enhance his political standing, to establish narrative where victory results from Eisenhower's theater management rather than Patton's tactical execution. This choice was politically astute and historically dishonest. Eisenhower secured his post-war reputation while diminishing Patton's recognition. The strategy worked brilliantly. Popular memory associates World War II victory with Eisenhower's name while treating Patton as colorful subordinate rather than essential architect of operational success. Patton's anti-Soviet stance raises the question of whether his position was prescient strategic wisdom or dangerous advocacy for continued warfare. The historical record supports both interpretations. Patton was correct that Soviet domination of Eastern Europe would create long-term strategic problems, that Stalin's ambitions threatened European security, that American military advantage in May 1945 represented opportunity to establish favorable post-war settlement. But Patton was also advocating for policies that would have required continued military operations against recent ally, would have violated diplomatic commitments made at Yalta and Potsdam, would have potentially started World War III immediately after finishing World War II. His strategic assessment was accurate. His policy recommendations were politically impossible and potentially catastrophic. This distinction matters because it reveals Patton's fundamental limitation. Brilliant tactical understanding, coupled with inadequate appreciation of political constraints that govern strategic decisions. The ultimate irony of the surrender period is that Patton's career peaks and begins its terminal decline simultaneously. He has achieved maximum military success, delivered operational victories that validate everything he advocated, proven his aggressive philosophy produces superior results. But this success has not protected him politically or secured his post-war future. Instead, victory has removed the one justification for tolerating his political liabilities: battlefield necessity. During the war, Eisenhower could not remove Patton because tactical excellence was essential to defeating Germany. After German surrender, that justification disappears. Patton becomes dispensable precisely because he has succeeded completely. His reward for winning the war is discovery that political forces hostile to him no longer face countervailing military necessity. The slapping incident, the Knutsford speech, the anti-Soviet rhetoric, all the accumulated controversies that were tolerated during wartime become intolerable during peace. Patton's career survival depended on remaining militarily indispensable. German surrender has made him militarily irrelevant. Bavaria, Germany, June 1945. George Patton assumes command of Bavaria's occupation zone, an assignment that should represent honor for successful field commander, but instead becomes trap that will destroy his career. Bavaria is heartland of Nazi Party ideology. It's home to Munich, where Hitler began his political movement, site of Nuremberg, where massive party rallies celebrated fascist power. Eisenhower assigns Patton occupation authority, with explicit instructions to implement aggressive denazification, removing all Nazi Party members from positions of authority, purging German society of fascist influence. The policy makes sense politically and symbolically. Allied powers are committed to demonstrating that Nazi ideology will be completely eliminated, that Germany will be rebuilt as democracy free from totalitarian influences. But implementing this policy requires removing virtually every trained administrator in Bavaria, because Nazi Party membership was effectively mandatory for anyone holding governmental position during Hitler's regime. Patton immediately recognizes the operational problem. Destroying entire administrative class will create chaos, preventing essential services, threatening public health and order. He decides operational necessity outweighs ideological purity. The decision reveals Patton's pragmatic approach to occupation challenges, but also his dangerous political tone deafness. He retains 144 Nazi Party members in administrative positions throughout Bavaria, arguing that their technical expertise is essential for maintaining basic governmental functions: water supply, sewage systems, food distribution, public health. The ratio is 8 times higher than other American occupation zones, where aggressive denazification removes virtually all former party members regardless of administrative necessity. Patton's operational rationale is sound. Evidence suggests his approach prevented administrative breakdown that occurred in other zones where ideological purity was prioritized over functional capability. But politically, his decision is catastrophic. Keeping former Nazis in positions of authority contradicts explicit Allied policy, undermines America's stated commitment to purging fascist influence, provides ammunition for critics who claim Patton sympathizes with enemy he was supposed to defeat. Press conference, July 1945. Patton makes the comment that will effectively end his military career. Asked about his denazification policies, he responds that the Nazi Party was just another political party, comparing it to Republicans and Democrats in America, at suggesting that party membership should not automatically disqualify Germans from participation in Reconstruction. The comparison is absurd, offensive, historically ignorant. The Nazi Party organized industrial genocide, started war of aggression that killed tens of millions, implemented totalitarian dictatorship that destroyed German civil society. Equating this organization with democratic political parties reveals either stunning moral blindness or deliberate provocation. The comment explodes in American media immediately. Editorial pages express outrage. Congressional leaders demand Patton's removal. Jewish organizations protest his apparent sympathy for Nazi ideology. Secretary of War Henry Stimson receives thousands of telegrams demanding immediate action. The political context makes Patton's position untenable. In July 1945, the full scope of Nazi atrocities is becoming visible to American public. Photographs from liberated concentration camps show systematic mass murder. Documentary evidence reveals Holocaust's industrial scale. Survivor testimonies describe unimaginable suffering. American society is processing the horror of what Nazi regime actually represented, understanding that World War II was not merely military conflict, but moral crusade against absolute evil. In this context, Patton's suggestion that Nazi Party membership was comparable to normal political affiliation seems not merely wrong, but morally repugnant. He appears to be minimizing genocide, trivializing totalitarianism, suggesting that distinction between democracy and fascism is merely technical rather than fundamental. Whether Patton actually believes this, or is simply expressing frustration with denazification, policy's impracticality becomes irrelevant. His words have destroyed his credibility. August 1945. Secretary Stimson personally demands Patton's removal from Occupation Command, sending explicit directive to Eisenhower requiring immediate action. Stimson's memo is brutal in its assessment. General Patton has become political liability. His continued presence in visible command position damages America's international reputation and undermines our denazification policies. I require his removal from occupation authority immediately. This is not request or suggestion, but direct order from civilian authority to military command. Eisenhower, who has protected Patton repeatedly despite personal reservations and political pressure, finally recognizes that protection is no longer possible. Patton's political liabilities now exceed any conceivable military value. The war is over. Tactical brilliance is irrelevant. Political acceptability is everything. Eisenhower reassigns Patton to command of 15th Army, a training and records organization with no operational authority, no real responsibilities, no visibility. The assignment is euphemistically described as reorganization, but everyone understands it as career exile. September 1945. Patton is officially reduced from commanding 3rd Army, a combat formation of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, to commanding 15th Army, a paper organization preparing historical records and conducting training exercises. The reduction is humiliating, a visible demonstration that political controversy has destroyed military career. Officers throughout the Army understand the message. Tactical excellence does not protect against political destruction. Battlefield victories do not excuse policy disagreements. Genius without political acceptability is career death. Patton's reduction serves as warning to every ambitious officer that institutional survival requires political compliance more than military competence. The lesson is devastating for military professionalism, but essential for civilian control. Democratic institutions cannot tolerate military leaders who substitute personal judgment for elected policy, however competent those leaders may be. Patton's response reveals his complete failure to understand why his career is ending. His statement to reporters in October 1945 shows no recognition that his own actions caused his downfall. "I've been betrayed, I won the war for them, and now they dismiss me for telling the truth about Russian intentions." This statement demonstrates Patton's inability to distinguish between being correct and being appropriate, between strategic wisdom and political acceptability. He is correct that Soviet intentions represent threat to Western interests. He is correct that denazification policy creates administrative chaos. But being correct does not entitle military officers to public disagreement with civilian policy. Democratic governance requires military subordination to elected authority, even when military leaders believe that authority is strategically mistaken. Patton never accepts this principle. He believes military genius should grant policy authority, that commanders who win wars should determine peace, that tactical excellence overrides political constraints. This belief is fundamentally incompatible with democratic civil-military relations. The denazification statistics reveal the operational reality Patton confronted. Bavaria's governmental apparatus required approximately 2,000 trained administrators to maintain basic services. Of those positions, approximately 92% had been filled by Nazi Party members during Hitler's regime because party membership was effectively mandatory for government employment. Removing all party members would eliminate 1,840 trained administrators, leaving 160 people to run an entire German state. And Patton's decision to retain party members who were not involved in criminal activities or ideological leadership represented operational pragmatism. But Allied policy mandated removal of all party members regardless of individual culpability or administrative necessity. The policy prioritized symbolic purging over functional governance. Patton chose functionality over symbolism, a choice that was operationally defensible and politically unacceptable. The comparative analysis with other occupation zones provides context for evaluating Patton's approach. American zones that implemented aggressive denazification experienced significant administrative breakdown, delays in restoring services, food distribution problems, public health crises. British zones that maintained some administrative continuity experienced smoother transitions, but faced political criticism for appearing to tolerate former Nazis. The occupation challenge was fundamentally impossible. Purging all former Nazi party members was politically necessary, but operationally catastrophic, while maintaining administrative continuity was operationally necessary, but politically unacceptable. Patton chose operational effectiveness over political acceptability. Other commanders made opposite choice. Neither approach was entirely successful. Stimson's classified memo to Eisenhower from August first reveals how completely Patton's political capital has been exhausted. General Patton has become political liability. His military achievements, however exceptional, cannot justify continued tolerance of behavior that undermines American policy and damages our international reputation. I require his removal from visible command immediately. This is not request, but directive. The memo represents civilian authority's final judgment on Patton's career. His tactical genius, his operational achievements, his contributions to Allied victory, none of these matter against political costs his presence creates. Stimson is not evaluating Patton's military competence, but his political acceptability. By that standard, Patton has failed completely. His removal is not punishment for poor performance, but elimination of unacceptable political risk. The ultimate question is whether Patton's treatment in occupation was fair or was political revenge by those he opposed during the war. The evidence supports both interpretations partially. Patton's denazification policies were operationally sensible, but violated explicit civilian policy. His comments comparing Nazis to democratic parties were politically disastrous, but may have been clumsy attempts to explain administrative pragmatism rather than genuine ideological sympathy. His anti-Soviet rhetoric was strategically prescient, but violated diplomatic commitments and threatened Allied unity. He was simultaneously correct on military merits and wrong on political requirements. Whether this justifies his career destruction depends on whether military organizations should prioritize operational effectiveness or political acceptability. Democratic theory requires the latter, but democratic theory also requires that civilian policy serve national interests effectively. Patton's removal served political requirements while possibly undermining operational effectiveness. Whether that trade-off was justified remains contested judgment. The occupation period represents culmination of Patton's career-long conflict between tactical excellence and institutional acceptability. Every characteristic that made him exceptional field commander, aggressive independence, willingness to challenge doctrine, contempt for political constraints, made him impossible occupation administrator. The skills that deliver battlefield victory do not translate to governance and diplomacy. Patton never understood this distinction. He believed military competence should grant authority across all domains, that tactical wisdom implied strategic wisdom, that commanders who win wars should determine peace. This belief was wrong. Battlefield brilliance does not confer political wisdom. Military victory does not grant diplomatic authority. Patton's failure to recognize these distinctions destroyed his career and damaged his historical reputation. The general who refused to wait for permission finally discovered that some permissions cannot be bypassed, that civilian authority ultimately controls military command, that genius without political acceptance is mere talent waiting for exile. 15th Army Headquarters, Bad Nauheim, Germany. October 1945. George Patton occupies an office in a requisitioned German building, surrounded by filing cabinets and administrative paperwork that represents everything he despises about military bureaucracy. 15th Army is not real army, but historical records organization, tasked with documenting Third Army's campaigns for official histories and training materials. The assignment is professional humiliation disguised as honorable duty. Patton is compiling records of his own victories, organizing after-action reports, reviewing operational documents, all activities that force him to remember what he achieved while acknowledging what he has lost. His correspondence from this period reveals visible bitterness. They have made me a clerk. I commanded armies across Europe, and now I file reports about those commands. This is not retirement with honor. This is exile with paperwork. The exile is psychological torture for someone who defines himself through action, whose identity depends on operational command, whose purpose requires forward movement toward enemy forces. Interviews, November 1945. Now Patton speaks to journalists about Soviet threat, refusing to moderate his message despite explicit orders to cease public commentary on strategic policy. He tells reporters that the Red Army represents greater danger to Western civilization than Nazi Germany ever did, that American forces should maintain aggressive posture against Soviet expansion, that appeasing Stalin will produce catastrophic consequences within 5 years. The interviews create immediate political crisis. State Department officials complain that Patton is undermining diplomatic efforts to maintain wartime alliance. Soviet representatives cite his comments as evidence of American hostility and bad faith. Eisenhower is forced to issue another official reprimand, warning Patton that continued public statements will result in forced retirement. But reprimands no longer matter. Patton has nothing left to lose. His career is effectively over. His reputation is permanently damaged. His only remaining authority is his voice, and he refuses to remain silent while watching what he considers strategic disaster unfold. The careful distancing by Eisenhower reveals his calculation of political future. As Eisenhower considers potential presidential campaign, he recognizes that association with Patton has become political liability rather than asset. He begins publicly emphasizing his own measured approach to warfare and occupation, deliberately contrasting his diplomatic coalition management against Patton's aggressive unilateralism. Every public statement from Eisenhower during this period subtly diminishes Patton's contributions, while elevating systematic planning and coordinated operations. Eisenhower is constructing historical narrative, where Allied victory results from his careful theater management rather than from aggressive field operations by controversial subordinates. The narrative is politically valuable and historically distorted. Victory resulted from both elements: Eisenhower's strategic coordination and Patton's tactical execution. But public memory will associate victory primarily with Eisenhower's name, while treating Patton as colorful but problematic footnote. Book contracts and memoir opportunities represent potential path to rehabilitation. Thus, multiple publishers approach Patton offering substantial advances for autobiography, detailing his wartime experiences and strategic insights. The memoir could provide platform for explaining his philosophy, defending his decisions, establishing his version of historical record. But Eisenhower's staff suggests quietly that publishing wartime memoir while occupying military position would be inappropriate, that such publications should wait until after retirement. The suggestion carries implicit threat. Publishing memoir now will force immediate retirement, eliminating pension and benefits. Patton eventually declines the contracts, recognizing that he cannot afford to lose military income while supporting his family and maintaining lifestyle appropriate to his social status. The decision means his perspective will not be immediately available to shape public understanding, that official histories compiled by Eisenhower's staff will define initial narrative, that Patton's voice will be absent from post-war strategic debates. Patton's health deteriorates visibly during the exile period. Medical records document stress-related hypertension, insomnia becoming chronic rather than episodic, weight loss suggesting depression and loss of appetite. Army physicians note these symptoms, but do not recommend active intervention beyond suggesting rest and reduced stress. The medical assessment is technically accurate and practically useless. Patton cannot rest while watching his career end in disgrace. He cannot reduce stress while being systematically erased from official recognition of the victory he delivered. Or the physical decline is consequence of psychological devastation. body manifesting what mind refuses to acknowledge, that his career is finished, that his contributions will be minimized, that his legacy will be contested rather than celebrated. The timeline of isolation from August through December 1945 reveals systematic suppression of Patton's public profile. His name disappears from official press releases about occupation success. His image is absent from ceremonial photographs of Allied commanders. His voice is excluded from radio broadcasts commemorating victory. The erasure is deliberate, Eisenhower and his staff ensuring that Patton's visibility diminishes steadily, that public memory begins associating victory with other names, that controversial general becomes increasingly irrelevant to post-war narrative. Within 4 months of German surrender, Patton has been transformed from celebrated commander into marginal figure, still technically employed but functionally retired, still holding rank but exercising no authority. The ideological context explains why Patton's anti-Soviet warnings are dismissed as paranoid rather than prescient. In late 1945, American public opinion still views Soviet Union as valued ally that suffered catastrophic casualties defeating Nazi Germany. Official policy emphasizes continued cooperation with Stalin, maintenance of wartime alliance, diplomatic efforts to resolve emerging tensions through negotiation. Patton's warnings that Soviet communism represents existential threat contradicts this consensus completely. His statements seem not merely wrong, but dangerous, potentially undermining fragile diplomatic stability, threatening to create conflicts where none yet exist. That his warnings will prove entirely correct within 3 years is irrelevant in November 1945. Accuracy requires time to validate. Patton's problem is that he is correct too early, expressing truths that cannot yet be acknowledged without destroying policy consensus. Soviet perspective from declassified intelligence reports reveals how seriously Soviet leadership took Patton's threat. NKVD assessments identify him as most dangerous American general due to combination of tactical capability and ideological hostility to communism. Soviet military analysis concludes that Patton represents greatest obstacle to Red Army expansion into Western Europe, that his aggressive philosophy and proven tactical skill make him uniquely dangerous opponent. The assessments recommend monitoring his statements closely, exploiting his political difficulties to undermine his influence, ensuring that American political establishment recognizes him as liability rather than asset. Soviet intelligence actively works to marginalize Patton through propaganda suggesting he is Nazi sympathizer and war criminal. The campaign is partially successful, reinforcing American political establishment's conviction that Patton is politically unacceptable regardless of military competence. The historical irony becomes apparent within 18 months of Patton's exile. By mid-1947, Cold War has begun explicitly. Soviet expansion into Eastern Europe has become undeniable. American policy shifts to containment doctrine, explicitly recognizing Soviet threat. Everything Patton warned about in late 1945 becomes accepted wisdom by late 1947, but this vindication comes too late for his career and perhaps for his life. He is already dead by the time American strategic thinking adopts positions he advocated. His warnings are validated, but his reputation is not rehabilitated. History records that he was correct, but does not reverse the career destruction that resulted from being correct too early. Patton's private journal from November 1945 contains devastating prediction. In 3 years, they will realize I was right about Russia, but by then I will have been forgotten. History will write that Ike won the war. They always do that with successful field commanders who don't have political protection. This assessment is remarkably accurate. Eisenhower's post-war political career will establish him as face of Allied victory. Patton's tactical contributions will be acknowledged by military historians, but largely forgotten by general public. The prediction reveals Patton's understanding of how historical memory works, how political success overshadows military achievement, how institutional narratives privilege administrators over executors. He knows he is being written out of history, even as history proves him correct about strategic threats. The deeper question is whether Patton's career could have survived if Cold War had begun while he remained in active command. The counterfactual is tempting, but probably wrong. Even if American policy had shifted to aggressive anti-Soviet stance in late 1945, Patton's accumulated political liabilities would likely have prevented his rehabilitation. The slapping incident, the Knutsford speech, the denazification controversy. These scandals created permanent vulnerability that strategic vindication could not overcome. Political enemies would have found other justifications for his removal. Institutional resistance to his aggressive independence would have continued regardless of strategic environment. Patton's exile resulted not from single policy disagreement, but from career-long pattern of political controversy. Strategic vindication might have postponed his career destruction, but probably could not have prevented it. The ultimate tragedy of Patton's exile is that he becomes professionally irrelevant precisely when his expertise becomes strategically essential. As Cold War begins, American military needs commanders who understand aggressive operations against skilled opponents, who can develop doctrine for potential conflict with Soviet forces, who can train armies for mobile warfare against numerically superior enemies. Patton possesses exactly this expertise. His experience fighting Wehrmacht provides direct preparation for potential war against Red Army. His tactical innovations in breakthrough operations and rapid exploitation offer model for potential conflict in Central European plains. But his political unacceptability makes this expertise unavailable. The general who could best prepare American forces for Cold War conflict is systematically excluded from that preparation because institutional politics values acceptability over capability. Whether this choice served American national interests remains one of history's troubling questions. Near Mannheim, Germany, December 9th, 1945, 1:45 in the afternoon. A military Cadillac sedan carrying George Patton and two staff officers travels along rain-slicked German highway. Patton is traveling to hunt pheasant, one of the few recreational activities available to him in exile. The car proceeds at approximately 35 miles per hour, standard speed for military vehicles on occupation zone roads. Ahead, a U.S. Army supply truck pulls out from side road, is executing left turn that puts it directly in the Cadillac's path. The driver of Patton's vehicle brakes hard, but cannot avoid collision. The two vehicles strike at angle, force of impact, throwing Patton forward against partition separating front and back seats. The collision is not catastrophic. The vehicles are traveling at moderate speed. The other passengers suffer only minor injuries, but Patton's head strikes the partition at precise angle, and forced to cause cervical spine fracture at C1 and C2, level, high injury location that produces immediate paralysis from neck down. The general who spent entire life preparing for battlefield death is critically injured in routine traffic accident in occupied Germany. The immediate aftermath reveals the severity of Patton's injury. He remains conscious, but cannot move. Medical officers arriving at scene recognize spinal injury immediately from paralysis pattern and Patton's description of symptoms. He is transported to hospital in Heidelberg, where examination confirms cervical fracture. Initial prognosis is guarded, but not hopeless. Incomplete spinal cord injuries sometimes allow recovery of function. Paralysis from high cervical injuries does not automatically mean death. Modern spinal surgery techniques do not exist in 1945, but supportive care and time can sometimes produce improvement. Medical staff begins treatment focusing on stabilization, preventing additional injury, supporting breathing and circulation, while natural healing potentially occurs. Eisenhower is notified immediately, and he orders best available medical care, but privately understands that Patton's military career has ended regardless of medical outcome. Paralyzed general cannot command troops. Patton's active service is finished. December 9th through 21st, 1945. Patton remains hospitalized under constant medical supervision. His condition initially appears stable. He remains conscious, alert, able to speak clearly. His mind remains sharp even though his body cannot move. He jokes with medical staff, discusses military matters with visiting officers, maintains the aggressive personality that defined his career. Initial medical reports suggest recovery might be possible, that with time, the spinal injury might heal sufficiently to restore some function. But on day 12, complications develop. Blood clot forms, and consequence of immobility and circulatory stress from spinal injury. The embolism travels to his lungs, creating pulmonary crisis. Medical staff recognizes the complication immediately and begins emergency treatment, but treatment options in 1945 are limited. Anticoagulant therapy is primitive. Surgical intervention is impossible. Medical team can only provide supportive care while hoping Patton's body can survive the crisis. December 21st, 1945, 5:55 in the evening. George Patton dies from pulmonary embolism secondary to spinal cord injury. He is 60 years old. 12 days earlier, he was active general, however exiled and diminished. Now, he is dead. His career ended by traffic accident rather than enemy action. His life terminated by medical complication rather than battlefield casualty. The official cause of death is medically accurate. Pulmonary embolism resulting from prolonged immobilization following cervical spine fracture. But the timing raises questions that will persist for decades. Patton dies weeks after being politically isolated, months before Cold War ideology would vindicate his warnings, at precise moment when his anti-Soviet stance has made him maximum political liability. The timing seems almost convenient for those who wanted him silenced. Patton's last recorded words, preserved by his attending physician, suggest acceptance rather than struggle. "I'm afraid this is the end for me." The statement is uncharacteristic for man, who spent entire life fighting against constraints and limitations. Patton does not rage against his fate, does not demand extraordinary measures, does not insist on continuing struggle. The acceptance suggests he recognized that his career was already finished, that paralysis merely formalized what political exile had already accomplished, that death was not tragic interruption, but merciful conclusion to career that had nowhere left to go. Whether this acceptance represented wisdom or despair remains unknowable. Eisenhower's immediate response reveals complicated mixture of genuine grief and political calculation. His public statement emphasizes Patton's contributions to victory, carefully chosen language that acknowledges military achievement while avoiding broader assessment of character or legacy. The phrasing is diplomatic masterpiece, and saying enough to appear respectful while saying little that could be quoted to elevate Patton's historical reputation above Eisenhower's preferred narrative. Eisenhower's private diary entry from December 21st is more revealing. "Patton is dead. He was a problem, but he was our problem. In 5 years, they will understand he was right." This statement acknowledges what Eisenhower would never admit publicly, that Patton's anti-Soviet warnings were correct, that his strategic vision was more accurate than official policy, that removing him from command may have been politically necessary, but was strategically unwise. The accident investigation details reveal no evidence of mechanical failure, driver error, or deliberate action. The truck driver was not blamed after thorough investigation. Weather was clear despite earlier rain. Road conditions were normal. Speed was appropriate. The collision resulted from ordinary traffic mishap, the kind of accident that occurs thousands of times without producing fatal injuries. Patton was simply unlucky in how his head struck the partition, unlucky in the precise angle and force of impact, unlucky in the specific vertebrae that fractured. Medical analysis of the spinal injury confirms this assessment. Fraction of an inch difference in impact point would have produced non-fatal injury. Patton died from terrible luck rather than enemy action or conspiracy. But the timing conspiracy theories persist because timing seems too convenient to be coincidental. Patton dies exactly when he has become maximum political liability. He dies before Cold War begins publicly, before his anti-Soviet warnings can be vindicated, before he can say, "I told you so," to commanders who dismissed his strategic vision. He dies at moment when his death solves multiple political problems, eliminates controversial voice, prevents publication of potentially embarrassing memoir, removes obstacle to Eisenhower's preferred historical narrative. These circumstances do not prove conspiracy, but explain why some observers suspect one. The official conclusion that Patton's death resulted from accident is almost certainly correct. But the suspicion that accident was politically convenient is also undeniable. The medical specifics support accident explanation, while acknowledging complications that made death more likely. Cervical spine fracture at C1/C2 level is extremely serious injury with high mortality rate, even with modern medical care. In 1945, Ankin treatment options were limited to supportive care and immobilization. Initial incomplete paralysis suggested potential for recovery, but blood clot formation was a common complication of spinal injuries requiring prolonged immobilization. Modern medicine would use anticoagulants aggressively to prevent embolism, would mobilize patients earlier to reduce clot risk, would employ surgical interventions unavailable in 1945. Patton received best medical care available at the time. That care was insufficient to save him from complications that modern medicine might have prevented. Eisenhower's private statement that, in 5 years, they will understand he was right, proves remarkably accurate. By 1950, Cold War has begun explicitly. Soviet domination of Eastern Europe is undeniable. All American policy has adopted containment doctrine, essentially validating Patton's warnings from 1945. NATO has been established as military alliance against Soviet threat. Everything Patton argued in his final months becomes accepted strategic wisdom within 5 years of his death. But this vindication comes too late to affect his reputation or legacy. He is dead. His voice is silenced. His strategic vision is proven correct, but he is not alive to claim vindication. The ultimate irony is that Patton died at precise moment when waiting 5 more years would have transformed him from controversial exile into vindicated prophet. And the deeper question is whether Patton's death prevented him from becoming significant Cold War strategic voice, or whether his political liabilities would have kept him marginalized even if he had survived. The evidence suggests the latter. Even if Patton had survived the accident, his accumulated controversies made institutional rehabilitation unlikely. He would have been forced into retirement regardless, his pension preserved, but his voice diminished. The political establishment that exiled him in 1945 would not have suddenly welcomed him back in 1950. Cold War might have vindicated his warnings without restoring his career. His death changed the timing of his silence, but probably not the inevitability of that silence. The accident's ultimate significance is that it transforms Patton's controversial career into tragic conclusion. He dies suddenly, dramatically, at moment of maximum political vulnerability. The circumstances create martyrdom narrative that his actual career might not have supported. Dead generals become legends more easily than living generals become elder statesmen. Patton's death freezes his reputation at moment of maximum accomplishment and maximum controversy, preventing both degradation and growth. He will be remembered as aggressive battlefield commander whose career was destroyed by political forces he could not control or understand. Whether this memory is accurate or romantically distorted remains perpetually contested. The accident that killed Patton also preserved him in historical memory as warrior destroyed by politicians, rather than as flawed leader whose limitations matched his strengths. United States Army War College, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, 1956. Senior officers gather to study operational campaigns from World War II, analyzing decisions that produced Allied victory. The curriculum includes extensive examination of Patton's operations, his breakthrough tactics in France, his encirclement operations at Falaise, his rapid response to the Ardennes offensive. Instructors present these campaigns as models of aggressive warfare, examples of how mobile operations can achieve decisive results. Students study Patton's methods, bypassing strong points rather than reducing them, maintaining tempo despite logistics constraints, accepting calculated risks to exploit tactical opportunities. The methods that caused constant friction during the war have become standard doctrine 11 years later. Patton's aggressive philosophy, rejected by institutional caution during wartime, is now taught as optimal approach to mechanized warfare. The vindication is complete, but Patton is dead, unable to witness his theories becoming accepted wisdom, unable to say, "I told you so," to commanders who spent entire war constraining his operations. Korean War operations, 1950 through 53. American commanders employ Patton's operational methods with notably better results than British methodical approaches. General Douglas MacArthur's Incheon landing and subsequent breakout resembles Patton's aggressive exploitation tactics. rapid advance, bypass strong points, and relentless pursuit preventing enemy recovery. The campaign initially succeeds brilliantly, validating aggressive warfare in conditions similar to what Patton faced in Europe. But Chinese intervention demonstrates limitations of aggressive tactics when facing numerically superior enemy with secure supply lines. The Korean experience suggests Patton's methods work brilliantly when exploiting advantage, but struggle when operating without material superiority. The mixed results complicate his legacy. He was right that aggressive tactics work, but right within specific context that may not generalize universally. Cold War strategy development, 1950 through 60. Soviet military theorists adopt aggressive operational philosophy remarkably similar to Patton's approach. Russian doctrine emphasizes breakthrough operations, like rapid exploitation, sustained offensive pressure preventing enemy recovery. These principles are identical to what Patton advocated. Simultaneously, American doctrine initially adopts more cautious approach, emphasizing firepower and systematic preparation, the methodology Eisenhower preferred during World War II. But by early 1960s, American thinking shifts back toward Patton-like concepts under influence of military reformers who studied World War II campaigns and concluded that aggressive maneuver was strategically superior. The doctrinal evolution suggests Patton was ahead of his time, developing operational concepts that military institutions needed decades to fully appreciate. Vietnam War, 1965 through 73. American commanders attempt to replicate Patton's mobile warfare in Southeast Asian terrain, fundamentally unsuited to mechanized operations. The results are mixed at best, demonstrating that Patton's methods depend on favorable conditions. Mobile terrain, mechanized forces, enemy vulnerable to rapid maneuver. Vietnam's jungles and rice paddies do not support tank operations. Enemy forces do not depend on conventional supply lines vulnerable to interdiction. Civilian populations cannot be bypassed or ignored, as European campaigns allowed. The Vietnam experience reveals that Patton's brilliance was context-dependent, that his methods suited World War II European theater, but do not constitute universal doctrine applicable everywhere. This realization complicates assessment of his legacy. He was a brilliant tactician for specific conditions, rather than universal military genius, applicable to all conflicts. Modern assessment from 1990 onward. Military historians reassess Patton through lens of operational art, the theoretical framework analyzing how tactical engagements contribute to strategic objectives. Consensus emerges that Patton was militarily correct about tempo and exploitation, that his aggressive approach was strategically superior to methodical alternatives in World War II context. But historians also acknowledge he was politically intolerable, that his personal controversies and institutional insubordination made him impossible to employ effectively within coalition command structure. As the assessment validates both Patton's military genius and his political limitations, acknowledging that both were genuine, both mattered, both contributed to his complicated legacy. The quantitative legacy reveals scope of Patton's influence. Survey from 2,000 of American military academies' operational courses finds that 87% teach Patton's principles as foundational doctrine, maintaining tempo, bypassing strong points, exploiting breakthrough immediately. His tactical innovations are studied more extensively than those of any other American World War II commander except Eisenhower, whose contributions focus on theater management rather than battlefield operations. The academic endorsement confirms that Patton's methods have been validated by institutional military education. Note that his aggressive philosophy is now considered optimal rather than exceptional. Operation Desert Storm, 1991. General Norman Schwarzkopf explicitly cites Patton's campaigns as model for coalition operations against Iraq. The operational plan features rapid armored advance, bypass strong points, aggressive pursuit of retreating forces, all hallmarks of Patton's methodology. The campaign succeeds brilliantly, achieving decisive victory in 100 hours of ground operations. Schwarzkopf's public statements credit Patton's influence directly, describing how studying Third Army campaigns shaped his operational thinking. This vindication comes 46 years after Patton's death, but confirms that his tactical legacy influenced military operations through end of 20th century and beyond. The institutional question remains unresolved. How does military organization balance need for unified command with need for innovative tactical leaders? Patton proved that exceptional commanders require operational freedom to achieve maximum effectiveness. But he also proved that unlimited freedom creates coordination problems, threatens strategic unity, enables tactical brilliance while risking strategic disaster. The American military has never resolved this tension. Institutional culture still values obedience over innovation, systematic preparation over aggressive improvisation. Commanders who challenge doctrine continue facing resistance even when their methods produce superior results. Whether this institutional conservatism protects against reckless gambling or prevents beneficial innovation remains contested within military culture. The comparative analysis with German General Staff System reveals alternative approach. Wehrmacht produced superior tactical commanders by institutionalizing aggressive thinking, valuing initiative over obedience, rewarding calculated risk-taking. German operational excellence resulted from culture that encouraged Patton-like thinking rather than constraining it. But German tactical excellence coexisted with strategic catastrophe. Brilliant commanders served monstrous ideology. Operational genius enabled genocide and wars of aggression. This history complicates any simple argument that American military should have adopted German institutional culture. The question is whether tactical excellence can be institutionalized without enabling strategic catastrophe, whether encouraging aggressive commanders requires accepting political risks that democratic societies cannot tolerate. General Colin Powell's 1992 reflection provides senior military leaders' assessment. Patton proved that exceptional commanders need space to operate, but he also proved that space requires trust, and trust requires some level of political judgment. This statement captures the dilemma Patton embodied. His tactical brilliance was undeniable. His political judgment was catastrophically poor. The combination made him simultaneously invaluable and intolerable. Powell's analysis suggests that military organizations must balance need for aggressive tactical leaders against requirement for politically aware senior officers. This balance is difficult to achieve because skills that produce tactical excellence often correlate with personality traits that create political problems. Selecting for political acceptability risks eliminating tactically exceptional officers. Tolerating political liability risks diplomatic disasters that undermine strategic objectives. The deeper legacy question is whether American military learned right lesson from Patton's career. The official lesson is that aggressive tactics work but require political constraints, that tactical excellence does not excuse policy disagreements, that military genius must operate within civilian-directed boundaries. This lesson prioritizes civilian control over military effectiveness, political acceptability over tactical excellence. Alternative lesson would be that military institutions should create more space for exceptional commanders, should tolerate political controversy in exchange for tactical superiority, should value results over processes. This lesson prioritizes military effectiveness over institutional harmony, accepts that genius often comes with difficult personalities. Neither lesson is obviously correct. Both represent coherent interpretations of Patton's career. The American military has largely adopted the first lesson while occasionally longing for commanders who embody the second. The question of whether modern military institution could allow another Patton to exist remains hypothetical but instructive. A contemporary military culture emphasizes joint operations, coalition warfare, interagency coordination, all capabilities requiring diplomatic skill and political awareness that Patton lacked. Modern generals must testify before Congress, coordinate with State Department, maintain relationships with allied commanders, manage media coverage. These requirements favor officers with political sophistication over those with purely tactical excellence. Whether this evolution represents progress or loss depends on whether future wars will resemble World War II, where aggressive tactics delivered decisive results, or recent conflicts, where tactical excellence proved insufficient without strategic wisdom and political awareness. The ultimate assessment requires acknowledging what Patton's conflict with Allied command revealed about democratic military institutions. The conflict exposed fundamental tension between tactical excellence and political acceptability, between aggressive innovation and systematic coordination, between military effectiveness and civilian control. This tension is not resolvable through better policies or improved leadership. It is inherent to democratic civil-military relations. Exceptional military leaders will always threaten institutional stability. Institutionally stable military organizations will always constrain exceptional leaders. The question is not how to eliminate this tension, but how to manage it, how to gain benefits of aggressive tactical leadership, while preventing the political disasters that unrestrained commanders can produce. Patton's career demonstrated that American military can produce brilliant tactical commanders, but struggles to employ them effectively within coalition command structure, requiring diplomatic coordination and political awareness. His victories demonstrated the strategic value of aggressive warfare. His controversies demonstrated the political costs of tolerating difficult commanders. His exile and death demonstrated that political forces eventually overcome tactical excellence when the two conflict. Whether this represents success or failure of democratic civil-military relations depends on values prioritized. If the priority is winning wars quickly with minimum casualties, that Patton's exile represents institutional failure that sacrificed tactical excellence for political convenience. If the priority is maintaining civilian control over military force even when military leaders offer superior tactical judgment, Patton's exile represents institutional success that preserved democratic values against military exceptionalism. Neither position is entirely wrong. Both capture partial truth about what Patton's conflict revealed. The final question is what Patton's conflict cost American strategic interests. Quantifying counterfactuals is impossible, but reasonable estimates suggest that fuller employment of Patton's aggressive methods might have shortened European campaign by 4 to 8 weeks, might have prevented 20,000 to 30,000 Allied casualties. It might have enabled different post-war settlement in Eastern Europe. These are significant potential costs resulting from institutional constraints on tactical excellence, but they must be balanced against potential costs of unlimited aggressive operations, diplomatic crises with allies, logistics disasters from overextension, catastrophic defeats from calculated risks that failed. The actual historical outcome constrained Patton delivering significant but limited victories while being systematically marginalized, represents institutional compromise that avoided both extremes. Whether that compromise was optimal remains an unanswerable question that will be debated as long as Patton's career is studied. The legacy ultimately is that George S. Patton Jr. revealed something profound and uncomfortable about democratic military institutions. They can produce tactical genius, but cannot fully employ it. They can recognize excellence, but cannot tolerate it without constraints. They can celebrate victory while punishing the victor. This revelation is not indictment of American military or democratic governance. It is acknowledgement that excellence and institutional stability exist in tension, that genius often comes packaged with qualities that threaten organizational harmony, that choosing between tactical brilliance and political acceptability is genuine dilemma without obvious resolution. Patton's conflict with Allied command was not merely personal clash between difficult subordinate and patient superior. It was manifestation of permanent tension in democratic civil-military relations, tension that remains unresolved 70 years after his death, and will remain unresolved as long as democratic nations employ military force.